What are we all doing? We're trying to create access for the older adults who aren't active enough. If you serve that population through good media, and you can get more people to go, I like that person's message. They make the gym sound like a fun, accessible place versus a scary place. We get more people to experience better mental health, better metabolic health, get them on the pathway. When someone is at that point, I look at them, I would love to train you. I would love to have your business. And it's a really safe way of asking for the client's business, and then shut up.
Time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, our guest is Andrew Coates. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And personal trainer, online coach, author, speaker. Been doing this for close to 15 years.
Just shy,
right?
Yeah.
So before we get into that, we have gifts for you. That this will be the first time that we've ever presented these on air.
Ooh.
So
I feel special.
What you have in there is a Table Talk t-shirt, which we have available on the website. Discount code Table Talk 10.
Sweet.
And then the book that's in there is made, element packs. And then I had those books made by the same company that makes our belts, our powerlifting belts.
Oh, this is epic.
So a general leather clasp. And then the
coin?
Yeah, the coin.
Ooh.
Over the years, I've only given those coins to people that embody the aim of the company.
Wow.
To live, learn, and pass on. So it's not something that you can buy. It's something that very few people have.
Hell yeah.
So, I appreciate you coming out.
Listen, when you guys invited me to come down here, I'm like, holy shit, Table Talk. All right, we're going to make the flight down from Edmonton. There's no direct flights from Edmonton. And I managed to catch a concert of the band Filter. So I interact with the lead singer, Richard Patrick, who's the little brother of the liquid metal Terminator, Robert Patrick. Cool little fact. And so I got to meet Richard last night and then saw him open up for Jerry Cantrell. And I'm like, I'm going to string all this together. Then I got to fly over to Dallas for an event. Mm-hmm. But this is worth it. I just had to make sure I orchestrated to come down because it's crazy to me. We were talking off air, and sometimes you get coaches who are like asking how much money they're going to be paid for an appearance like this. I mean, are you kidding me? Dave, how long have you been writing in this space? I mean, I came through my first couple of years, I'm reading you on T Nation, mm-hmm. right? And then you and that generation of T Nation writers was what inspired me to turn around and start writing for my own website. Then I got to write for T Nation, and then Tom is in there as well. And so that I respect. And to get an opportunity like this, no, I'm going to make the effort instead of going, well, I got to take a weekend off from my clients. How much am I getting paid? I'm like, are you kidding me? Man, you embrace opportunities like this because you can't pay for this coin. You can't pay to come on this podcast. So I appreciate it.
Yes. Well, we have a crew that's part of we have a Discord crew, a YouTube crew and so forth. And they're really how the podcast is alive. And so I choose one of their questions to kind of start off before we kind of get into the episode. And the question that they had was, your background was in business. I believe your degree was in business and finance.
Yep.
And in 2010, you moved into the fitness space.
Absolutely, yeah.
What was the catalyst for that?
There's a long story there. So I'm from St. John's, Newfoundland, and Newfoundland, small island, Eastern Canada, not a lot of people. Fun fact, it's where Jeff Nippard and Jordan Shallow were born. They're both younger than me, so I didn't know them, then. I know Shallow better now. And the iconic bodybuilder Frank McGrath. Now, he's an old friend of mine. He used to be in the same gym with him. But went to business school. Thought I was going to be a doctor. My grandfather's a doctor. There's lots of them in the family. Decided to go into business. Great. Worked for a bank for a little while. Did a lot of different things. Wasn't for me. Worked in bars, worked in nightclubs. Owned a nightclub for a little while. My dad and family have a bar, a neighborhood pub there as well. And Dad was always in various businesses. And so I thought that was a path. But then there just wasn't a lot of opportunity. Again, Eastern Canada. And then with the bar ownership and that life came a lot of other crazy shit, right? So, I'm upstairs in the upstairs room of my bar drinking and partying with like Collective Soul. And there's a bunch of my buddies who are ex-NHLers, et cetera. And just decided that wasn't something I wanted. So I moved across the country to Edmonton. I had a friend who had a room. That's why I picked it. And like a lot of coaches get into this stuff because they're passionate 20-year-olds, and I think that's great. And I think a 20-year-old in the industry has a long runway. But I also think that they need to accumulate life experience, and life experience is one of the most valuable things to be a coach. So I worked in a casino for a while as a poker room dealer, poker room manager when I went to Edmonton. And that was so whatever, late shifts, kind of crappy like lifestyle. And I would go to the gym at like 2 a.m. after my shifts are over. And at some point, just because I had a little bit of a break from lifting was part of my world. I was a high school athlete, a lot of stuff. And then the staff, the trainers at this gym kept bugging me to come work there as a trainer. I kept saying no. I'm like, nah, it's all good, right? Until I finally said yes. That was it. I fell into it because I needed a job. And that sounds, it's not the passion hypothesis at all. It's like, okay, cool, let's give this a try. I got busy fast. I was very lucky. I found T Nation in your media and everybody that came out of that very early. Bodybuilding.com, Dr. Elaine Norton's on nutrition, Dr. Mike Isertel at Renaissance Periodization type stuff. And as it happened, Dean Somerset, who's a longtime T Nation guy, he happened to work for the same company, a different location. And so did a lot of his internal continuing education and just kind of went down the evidence-based strength conditioning rabbit hole. And that was very formative. And meanwhile, it's simple things on the floor of the gym. It's being engaged with your clients. I needed to make a livelihood. Okay. So it was hustle, work the hours. I think a lot of coaches now are in such a rush to get online. And I think the world has changed in 14 years in the industry where I don't believe in this gatekeeping where people say, well, you need a minimum of 5 years of in-person gym experience before you've earned the right to train online. It's like, in theory, yes, being a good in-person coach will make you a better online coach. You need that experience. But to gatekeep it doesn't work anymore either because the world has changed. Online training now is so ubiquitous that I think it's a skill you have to embrace concurrently. And a lot of hardline old school coaches will say, no. It's like, but if we get on with that elitist mindset, we're just to turn away the young coaches who are coming in who are going to learn both skills together, and they're going to go to the online trainer, mentor, grifter section of the business coaching world, and who are going to promise them, scale to your 10K month, scale to your 20K, 50K month, without actually doing much work. So kind of to back to the original question, I fell in love with it, right? I found a passion within something that I needed as a job, worked the hours, kept learning every step of the way, and that led to more and more opportunities. And then eventually I left that company, opened my own, contract in a facility, but had my own company. And that led to opportunities to travel to the industry, to connect with a lot of the people who I was listening to on podcasts, a lot of these authorities. And that led to opportunities to the invitation to write for T Nation, and then so on from there.
Sure. When did you start training?
I'm sorry. I need you've wiggling the shot. You're blocking Dave almost entirely at times, so I need you to go that way.
Me?
Yeah.
Cool.
There we go. I'm so sorry for the interruption.
Sorry. When did you start training?
So because I was involved in a variety of, high school athletics or even before, so in rural northern Newfoundland, where I originally grew up, I was into cross-country skiing, amongst other things, and basketball. So high level at cross-country skiing, gave it up eventually. But my dad bought me a weight bench, the old Joe Weider stuff in the basement, because there was no gyms in this tiny town. And so I was intermittent with that. Didn't know what I was doing, but would play around with it. But I got really serious about working out. I would dabble in the gym, late teens, university days. Me and an old girlfriend would go to the university gym. I got really serious at 24. That's when it flipped a switch. I got pretty sick. It probably was just a flu, but I lost 10 pounds, was sick for 3 weeks. I just wasn't like taking care of myself. And I said, all right, enough of this. I'm 6'2" and I was down to 170. So that's kind of lean. And so I just got serious about the gym 4 or 5 times a week, nonstop, bodybuilding magazines and old school bodybuilding ideology. But that stuff actually works really well if you're eating enough protein and eating enough fuel. I think people overcomplicate it, at least for beginners. And, and at the time, certainly drug free, I put on almost 40 pounds. I was up to 210 pounds in 7 months, right? I guess definitely good genes for it. But just fell in love with it. It completely changed my life, physique, but it changed confidence in the way you interact and walk in the world. Mm-hmm. And then I was just hooked from there. And it was always a part of my life. Even in those days, especially with the bar ownership, it competed for a while. And then as you obviously mature and get older, you realize, well, you can't have things in your life that become so all-consuming that it conflicts with lifting. So once that was purged, then guess what? it's been straight, 4 to 6 workouts a week for well over 20 years.
With bars in the casino, what were some of the skills that you acquired there that carried over to the personal training? And I put that in there because I worked as a personal trainer for a very long time, and there's a lot of people that can't communicate for shit. And my experience of working in bars, you kind of learn how to communicate rather effectively on different ends of the spectrum pretty quick.
It's the interpersonal stuff, but it's also conflict resolution. There's a great metaphor that I've been sharing for years. So if anybody has ever played poker in a casino, you have 10 players around a table, you're a dealer. And there's often a table bully. One loud, aggressive, impulsive, nasty personality. And if you're a skilled poker dealer who runs a fast table and knows their name and can be efficient with the whole process, most of the time, the table bully is actually placated, which means that everybody else has a good experience. But what I observed was there was a lot of dealers who weren't skilled, weren't fast, didn't have the interpersonal control over the situation, and they were very conflict averse. So when the table bully is berating players for playing stupid, which either, has them get up and leave or sit there quietly and be frustrated that the dealer's not actually like dealing with this asshole, then you may avoid conflict with the bully, and this is life, but you lose the respect of the other 9 people. And they quietly walk away, they don't like you, they don't come back to the room, etc. But what I would do is, if I could get along with and placate the table bully who liked the way I ran the table, they calm down, or tactfully put them in their place when they're acting up, or directly confront them and challenge them. And even if that led to friction with that bully, it meant the other 9 players quietly were really appreciative, respected you, wanted to come back. And when you're dealing with gyms, listen, you work in commercial gyms, there's shitbaggery on those floors. I think they're wonderful environments on the average. I think there's a lot of negative and stupid stereotypes, and you get Joey Swole videos that makes it I love Joey, but over amplifies the sense that, oh my God, someone could be filming me in the background and this is ever, no, these are tip of the iceberg, rare kind of incidents. And I think gyms are amazing places on the average, but you spend enough time in them. There's people doing stupid shit. I've broken up fights in gyms before. Sounds crazy. And so if you can handle that, and if you can deal with the bully type personality, then everybody else likes you, respects you, and then they turn around and they want to interact with you. I've made, most of my closest friends in the world I met from just working in gyms. Plenty of old girlfriends who I met in gyms. And I still to this day coach 2 of the guys who were poker players on the tables I would deal on 18 years ago. They're both clients of mine. I train a couple more people who are my coworkers in the gym because of the way you treat people and reputation there. And even if it wasn't a union, but it was a union shop mentality where if you dealt faster or if you dealt with people on a higher standard, the other staff didn't like it because you made them look unprofessional or what have you. It's the same thing in these commercial gyms sometimes, and that creates friction. But at the end of the day with this stuff, my career, I try to approach this with an abundant mindset. We were all talking before this about how I can possibly be of service to Elite FTS and support you guys. But there's also an element that my personal training job and career isn't a team sport on the floor in that moment. And I'm not interested in lowering myself to some sort of arbitrary baseline to avoid making someone else look unprofessional. I mean, the trainer who's there on his phone half the time or flirting with gym members instead of actually focused on their coach, that's not my problem. And if you make me look good because I'm professional, so be it. But in the end, I've just been riffing, but at the end, what I found is a lot of people would walk up to me on the floor because they would see the way I was with clients, or because I had some sort of like positive personal interaction. Let's say even somebody's doing something stupid in the gym. Like I've got 2 good buddies of mine, really good buddies of mine. And one of the first times I ever interacted with them, I don't know what they were doing. They were dropping weights in this gym 13, 14 years ago. And just because they had a rapport with me, I could go over to them and be like, hey guys, I need a favor, right? And I go to one of their places every Boxing Day, and I don't drink much anymore, but it's like drinking in pajamas and playing Settlers of Catan before noon on Boxing Day as a ritual. But if I mishandle it, I would have made an enemy instead of a friend.
So would you say in those scenarios, you're probably going to deal with friction either way though, right? Like you take the poker table example, you either choose the friction of going in with the bully and placating them and pacifying them, or you deal with the maybe passive friction of 9 people then not having a good experience. So it's all friction regardless, right? So you may as well just jump in at the deep end and you apply yourself to the friction that actually gives the best payoff. Would you say that's fair?
Absolutely. I mean, there's another metaphor, and I'm not an expert in relationships. I've heard Hormozy talk about this sort of thing. It's having the tough conversation now up front to get on the same page about something and put it out there, as opposed to letting it fester and lead to conflict for years if the relationship endures over it, or even decades. So yeah, having the tough conversation now, being tactful and respectful about how you go about it. And you can earn rapport with a lot of people. I got a lot of good people in my world who it may have started out with a little bit of friction over something, but guess what? You go in, you give people grace, you assume charitable intent. Like, just don't assume. Was it God, I can't remember the bias or the fallacy. Anyway, but when you're driving in a car, I'm side questing here, and everybody else is a fucking asshole on the road. Someone cut you off. Look at that fucking piece of shit. Sorry, I'm sure I can swear. And but then when you inadvertently do something, you don't see, you have to merge a lane late. You got to squeeze in a little bit. Someone honks at you. You're like, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm fundamental attribution error. I'm fundamentally a good person. You want and hope people understand that you made a mistake or that you're inherently a good person. But when someone else does it, you assume that they're a terrible human being. We expect everybody will give us that grace, but we don't extend that grace to other people in any part of life. And I think just as a fundamental way of approaching the world, someone may be having a bad day. You don't know what the hell's going on in their world. And if you just don't decide based on a small action, oh, that person's a terrible person, then trust me, life is just less friction overall. And give them grace, especially when there's some sort of friction. And oftentimes they'll turn around and be like, hey, listen, man, I'm sorry, I'm having a bad day. Like, just as a philosophy, it avoids a lot of problems.
So you mentioned the kind of stereotypical passion-driven trainer, like stepping on the gym floor at age 20, maybe not so much life experience. So obviously you have now like online personal training certifications, all this type of stuff. And we can probably assume if they're passionate, they're reading, they're educating themselves, articles, podcasts, whatever. Where should their focus be then in terms of skill development that actually makes them a good trainer, as opposed to being a knowledgeable trainer with no clients, to create the business for themselves to shine?
I mean, behavior change happens when you ask a lot of questions and you're good at the interpersonal behavior, the behavior change psychology side. I mean, read stuff like that. You can read up on cognitive behavioral therapy, which is actually one of the only evidence-based, and I'm not an expert in that stuff, but that's a good place to start. There's a book I really like called The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. And he talks about a bunch of stuff. One of it is coaches are so wired when clients ask something or say something, they're like, oh, I know the answer. Let me show you how smart I am. Ask questions, probe. And most of the time the client knows the answer. And any coach who's worked for any amount of time knows that if you tell people what to do, okay. But when people arrive at the decision and realization themselves and they choose based on your questions, guess what? They're far more likely to implement it. And that's where change happens. Most of the people we're working with, like you're working with a high level strength athlete, like you guys do. And they know what they're doing, but oftentimes, yes, you're planning and implementing the strategies, whatever the periodization is of the program, and then you're there kind of in their ear, if it's in person, getting them to push themselves. Okay, cool, that makes sense. But for the general pop, which is still 90+% of the world, we sometimes get in this microcosm of strength athletes or bodybuilding athletes or whatever, and I don't coach those populations. The everyday person, the obstacle is not knowing what to do. It's being overwhelmed with too much conflicting nutrition and training stuff, and just getting into the habit of showing up for themselves consistently and getting the narratives and the belief systems that are holding them back out of the way. So it's usually, they know what to do for the most part. Mm-hmm. If you can lead them to that water, but they still have to choose to drink it.
Sure. I remember reading a passage from Dan John in one of his books, and he was basically talking about having those conversations with clients and how basically his process was ask them what they want and then basically repeat it back to them. And then they would look at him like he's some kind of magician. As in like, I only have time to train twice a week. I really like squatting and I want to get my legs better. So for my running or whatever. And then he would say, well, okay, why don't we write you a training program? It's 2 days a week where you squat on both days, focus primarily on the lower body. And then they would look at him like, I can do that? because they're so paralyzed by all this conflicting information. Someone just said, yes, you can do that. And all of a sudden that gateway kind of opens then, and you have the buy-in, which, you know, is a huge part of it.
It's buy-in, right? I mean, we've all worked with the clients, especially any trainer who works at Gen Pop, who bought personal training, and that was the gesture and the effort, and they thought, okay, that's it. And it was sort of a signal to the world, hey, I have a personal trainer. But then they struggled to even show up for the workouts. There's another aspect of it, and it works both ways, trainer to client and client to trainer. If the client enjoys the experience with you, then they're going to come back. Right? Like, and for a lot of people, they have this idea that, oh, working out sucks. This is terrible shit. Like, I'm not the sort of person who works out. But then they come into you, and honestly, there's only so much technical cue-based coaching you can work on with a client, especially general population, even strength athletes. They generally know what they're doing. So what do you end up talking about? Sports or various other shit that they're interested in. I've got clients, I used to play World of Warcraft, and I've got clients who love that stuff, or Magic the Gathering cards. And some people listening go, oh, that's nerdy shit. Guess what? Nerds, there's a good population there to work with. And there's a ton of overlap between anime. You get Dr. Mike Isertel, you know, big time into anime, right? There's a lot of like RP people who follow that stuff, that they like anime, like Dragon Ball Z. Okay, cool. Don't be too good to dive into that world. It's the classic cliche, oh my God, I'm saying it, meet them where they're at. But guess what? That's the reality of coaching with most people. Most of your conversations are not going to revolve around the technical stuff. Most of it's going to be just being a real human. And the way it works in opposite is, I still coach full-time in person. I love it. But how do I sustain that? Because I want the right kind of people to self-select to coaching with me that I like hanging out with and talking to. We've all had the client who is, you dread it. You're like, oh my God, I got to deal with this client again. And that's rare, but it happens. But it saps your energy, and every other client during your day feels it if you're not careful. So it's also making sure that you've got the wrong people off the bus for you. And then make sure that you're building relationships with the right kind of people. And I've had lots of clients who, they kind of forget that the hour went by because we were talking about the stupid shit that the Toronto Blue Jays have been doing the last little while, or whatever hockey bullshit's going on. I'm Canadian, so.
Summer's here and so is the heat. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym. It kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering Table Talk listeners a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. That's 8 single-serving packets for free. And if you're an Element Insider, you have first access to Element Sparkling, a bold 16-ounce can of sparkling electrolyte water. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link. One of the reasons why I like to have people out like you, the personal trainers that work with the Gen Pop, is the distinction between the strength athletes and Gen Pop is not as divided as what people think, to where in the strength culture, bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman, and so forth, the top 10% probably have everything else dialed in. But that's a very, very small percentage of a very, very small percentage, right, to begin with. But once you get out of that top 10% and you start looking at the lifestyle and the habits that all these other people have, they're exactly the same as what you're dealing with Gen Pop. Mm-hmm. If it's the rest, the nutrition, stress management, all those other things, that's a fucking wreck. Even in the 1% that I'm talking about, if they're overreaching or they're not making progress with the programming and so forth, the answer is typically not the programming and so forth. It's falling in those other sectors where they struggle the same way that most Gen Pop people do. So the commonality is there because they're just all people. Mm-hmm. And the they might be disciplined for the training, but I would even argue and say they're disciplined for certain aspects of the training, but a lot of the parts of the training they just hate, but they do it anyhow. That would be the one distinction between the two.
I would believe absolutely that your relationship with the people you've coached over the years is probably what pushed them over the top. I mean, I'm sure you have great athletes that self-select to work with you, but I gotta believe that something about your mindset, the behavioral side of stuff, you're absolutely right. It's going to get them to do just something that much, that little bit more, that pushes them, because it's a game of inches at the top levels of strength and performance, right? And getting them to buy in. It sort of sounds like I contradict myself earlier, but with the high level athletes, yes, I think they're wired to show up, but I still think to do that bleeding edge and not to fall too far over it, I think a coach can have a powerful impact on it. And it's one of the reasons why you rarely see someone at the top levels who is self-coached.
Yeah.
Right. And there's the value added, right? And that's the evidence of the value added of a great coach. And I'm sure, I mean, listen, some coaches aren't going to like this. But, whatever you believe about AI-based stuff, the advanced machine learning that's well-trained and has really good data sets on training stuff, there are not a lot of coaches who will be able to make great programs that differentiate above and beyond what AI will be able to do at some point in the not too distant future. Some people might get pissed at that.
I would say it already can.
I think so too. So it's going to be the other factors that push you over, and it's going to be the coaching human element of it, that relationship that will get the best out of people.
Well, as you were talking earlier, and it was a topic that we have on the list here, is I believe that's what's going to wash out all the online coaches that suck.
I'm doing it.
Yeah, because the ones that are just doing the programming and so forth, the AI right now can program better than what they can do. And I would argue you can program better than probably anybody. So they can't, when it becomes just a matter of putting in a prompt to be able to get what they want, or paying somebody $200 a month to send them a weekly template, they're gone, right? Unless they have some type of personal interaction to be able to get into all those other things, because the program is just a piece, right? That's it. It's just there. If it was just that, all you'd have to do is buy a book. And that was it. And there's thousands of books out there. You guys have authored tons of books, but that doesn't guarantee that the results are going to happen because of all the other variables that are associated with that.
Why does a company hire these leadership gurus who write the book? You can read the $30 book, but then they hire them for 5-figure, 6-figure speaking things and consulting fees to implement the shit that's in the book, right? Okay, so all the stuff you were talking about, I'm flying into Dallas to appear at an event. It'll be after that, it'll be done by the time this is aired. And the presentation is on this exact thing you talked about. We have a lot of coaches being sold on the promise of getting off the gym floor. And sure, online, I think you can still make online coaching, voice messaging, video messaging, make it really personal, really interactive. There's a lot of high leverage, low effort thing there. But you get these coaches who want to, again, scale. The business gurus, and there's smart ones and there's dumb ones, have been worshiping at the altar of scale for the last few years. And they're talking about 20K months and 50K months. And if you hear someone, there are legitimate 7-figure business owners in this industry, but they don't talk like this. You get someone who's like, hey, my 7-figure business. Well, they're not talking about their 7-figure expenses and stress bullshit. And I think a lot of that's kind of a chasing and display of status, which is sort of an insecure lens I think too many coaches look at the world through. And I think they're being sold this idea that they can systemize and scale and automate themselves out of actually interacting with people, right? The human element, and they want to pull that back and make more money. And I always laugh, and it's a bit of a stereotype, and I have friends who in this world, but as being Canadian, there's a small city in Western Canada called Kelowna, and I call it like the Jersey Shore of Canada. And it seems to be where all the online physique, bikini coaches tend to hang out, and they're on boats and everything. And that's a lot of their media. And I don't find how that's appealing to most potential clients anyway, but it's a window into the way that they want to run their businesses. I don't think they actually want to spend a lot of time working with people, and it's fine. I think coaches have earned the right as you get deeper in this world to spend less time on the coaching floor, earn a great livelihood. Everybody's entitled to earning a great livelihood. And I think you can use systems and scale and even automation in very smart ways. But if you're tempted to automate yourself out of the real human interaction, if people are using DM automation, which can be good, but if you're using it to pretend to the person on the other end, like a follower or a client, that it's really you, that's a slippery slope. And I don't like that idea at all. I think it's a great opportunity for the coaches who care, because here's a crux of a big argument I have to what you said earlier. There will be people who will opt out of real human interaction. They will go towards the automated, AI-based, algorithmic-based coaching model. It'll be cheaper. I'll use Renaissance Periodization as an example. They've got a couple of apps. You guys just had Mike Isertel on here. If you notice at Mike's media lately, he's talking about AI a lot. He's a smart fucking human being. Do you think you as a coach are going to be able to lean into the algorithmic-based stuff and beat Renaissance Periodization at that game? They have the templates. Their templates from over a decade ago are better than most coaches in the industry now. And now they have this much runway, they have that much data, they have the scale of their business, they have smart people at the helm of it who are forward thinking about this stuff. And you think you as the coach is somehow going to be able to compete with that and charge a lot more than what the hypertrophy app? You're kidding yourself. You're going to get crushed. And Mike also has this massive brand. Their YouTube is huge. His face is everywhere. A lot of video-based media, you get to see the personality that is Mike. You can't compete with him on that either, at least at scale. So guess what? The only other path to go is the high, real human interaction side of things, or else AI-based, automated, algorithmic-based coaching is going to decimate you, and it'll sweep those people out of the industry.
Yeah, but for the people that you're talking about, what it can do is it can eliminate all the admin that you're already doing. So the spreadsheets or whatever that you're putting together, it takes care of all that. So now that opens up more time for that more personal interaction. And then that is going to create a higher value compared to those other things. So in essence, yes, you can compete, because on scale, you're not going to be able to provide that same higher value. The problem with the online industry up until this point is you got kind of like a set rate. $250 a month or whatever it's going to be. And it doesn't matter how good you are or how bad you are. The market's kind of set that rate. So what happens with that is people try to scale, and if they can get 80 or 100 clients, they're going to be able to do it, but the service is going to suck. Where the people that have really, really good service are spending more time per client, but they're still only going to be able to get that much per month. As this changes, that bit per month will increase, because now that personal side, the authentic side, will be able to be exaggerated, because less time is going to be needed to be able to do all the administrative bullshit that comes around, which nobody ever talks about, by the way, either. It's just online coaching. You just, there's a whole bunch of shit that goes on behind the scenes to be able to make that happen, where a lot of the better coaches will tell you, man, after like 30, 40 clients, that's it. I have no more time. Where with them, if you can think now, if you can eliminate, because I'm pretty sure 70% of that time, maybe 80, is not with the client. It's all on that admin shit. Now you get rid of that. And now they can have 120 and be able to do it at a higher price point, because say the RP app or whatever it is, as of now, there's not an avatar, that's popping up to be able to talk you through all the things, which will happen soon, but it's still not authentic. It's not a real authentic thing. And, my optimism on all this is, as these things become more and more digitized, algorithmic, whatever you want to say, the more people, we're going to hit a breaking point where people are going to start to crave personal interaction, to where gyms, restaurants, bars, things like that are going to thrive, because there's only so much shuttering that can happen. And we already kind of saw that during the pandemic, because there was a lot of shuttering, and now we see, people are like, we need to get the hell out. That's just going to happen more at scale with all this.
Absolutely. I think it's already happening in a very big way. People are going back, like you said, to the restaurants. I like the analogy of vinyl records versus digital media. I've been collecting vinyl the last few years aggressively. I grew up with it. My dad always had vinyl collections, and there's something different about the experience of putting on a record versus just playing something or streaming something. It's experiential, and there will always be people who are going to lean into that real human experience. And I think as more and more things become automated and algorithmic, which is great for our online banking, for example, I don't want to have to go down the branch, every time I need something. But on the rare times I do, it's kind of like, what's always you go to the bank, who's always in front of you at the line? Some sweet little old person. And at first you're like, oh, fuck, and then you're like, wait, no, man, like they're dressed up. It's probably some of the only meaningful human interaction they getting out of the house. People, almost all people in some form are going to self-select to more human interaction, because a lot of the things that we do are going to be automated and online. So they're going to seek it out. And I think coaching is one of the spaces. So I think the coaches who are trying to go to app-based and algorithmic, again, I think they're, like you said, get the low value added systemized stuff, get that done that way. Where's your zone of genius, right? Your zone of genius is going to be in the human relationship side of stuff. More time at that. That's where you're going to differentiate yourself as a coach, because I really do think that a lot of people are still going to self-select to that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think a lot of coaches are maybe, though, undervaluing, when you're talking about scale, do you think they're maybe undervaluing the reach they already have? So what I mean by that is, you work at, I don't know about the gym that you worked in, but when I was on the gym floor as a PT, we maybe had 3,000 clients. Gym members, sorry. And, say there's 8 to 10 trainers, so you split them between you. I think at the time, the average was like 3 to 4% of gym members bought personal training. So like maybe between you, there was like 100 to 120 clients to fight for or whatever. And of course, when someone's buying a gym membership, most of the time they're not buying a gym membership because, oh, Andrew works at that gym. I am getting a gym membership here because Andrew is here. But then you look at someone's social media and they have followers. You can presume most of those followers are following them because they deem that you have something they want to hear. You have knowledge, you have experience, whatever they want to consume. Now that person will look at, say, their 2,500 Instagram following and say, that is not worth investing in. I don't put time into that because 2,500 is nothing. But that's basically every person that was in that theoretical gym. If they joined because you were there and you might have a tidbit for them, that would be a great environment to be a trainer in, right? And that's kind of where they're at there with their social media, but they don't perceive that as worth. Do you get what I'm saying?
100%. There's so much in here. So we were talking off air about too many people in the industry chasing status. And so therefore they chase things like follower counts on social media. So you could think about in terms of like 3 mile, 5 mile famous. Okay. And I think Jonathan Goodman's book, The Obvious Choice, I'm going to plug it. Jonathan's a great friend. I think that's a must read for almost any coach. And Jonathan will say in the book, you can compete in the noisy space of social media and try to scale and gain followers. Or you can look at exactly what you said, who's already there. 2,000 followers on Instagram, your Facebook friends list. For years, long before Instagram was a thing, I would post on my Facebook and I would add people who I was acquainted with and just connected with on my Facebook, my old customers at the casino. And I would post clients' personal best lifts. I would write blog style on Facebook. And I remember a friend of mine, I got him a job in the company, and he asked the director in the training seminars, hey, are we allowed, this is like 12, 13 years ago, are we allowed to post on social media? And then the director paused and he's like, well, only 2 trainers in the entire company use social media, me and Dean Somerset, right? And that kind of said something, crystallized something. And it was also, like you said about like people joining the gym, I actually brought in a ton of referrals to the company because I would post on my media. And here's a concept to hold on to: staying top of mind to your existing audience. There are so many people from other walks of life, and you think as the trainer, I'm posting this stuff, I'm annoying these people with my training and nutrition shit. And okay, so what? But guess what? How many times have we coached someone or after them saying, man, I walked up the stairs and I felt like shit? Or someone in my world asked, hey, do you know a good personal trainer? And you were the person top of mind because you're showing up even for the people. I'll give you a good example of this. When trainers ask, should I start a second Instagram account for my training page? I'm like, fuck no, don't do that. Because only the people who are already in will self-select to switch over. You still want to serve all the people that don't even realize that they need you yet, but something's going to happen where they're either going to figure it out themselves, their family, their parents, because more of that generation are wanting to get into fitness now, or some friend is going to ask, hey, do you know anybody good? And if you stay very visible and continue to share stuff, then you stay top of mind to your network. and coaches forget, most people are not following the industry authorities. You're, Jordan Syatt with 1 million followers, or Brett Contreras with over 1 million followers, or Mike Isertel, right? But they're following you, and they have a relationship with you in some way, shape, or form. They know you and your integrity. And if you keep showing up as a reminder, on average over time, at least a portion of those people end up coming to see you, referring to you, and that'll sustain your business. And I've had a full-time in-person coaching business long before my Instagram took off.
Sure.
I didn't need it.
Do you think? Sorry. Go on.
Well, one of the things I've kind of said before is it's not real life either, right? So if you're sport conditioning coach and that's your business, and you are given the opportunity to be able to speak at a affluent high school with parents that can afford your services, to be able to speak in the health class of 20 kids, right? And you go speak to the 20 kids, and the impact you can have on those 20 kids is huge. Now, if you can go speak at their pep rally for the game, and now there's 200 people, you're going to lose some of that influence because there's more people, right? Now, if you scale that up and now you're speaking at Ohio Stadium in front of 110,000 people, that's going to have less influence as it goes there. And as it keeps scaling up, the message it goes from being a personal message to being what's called advertising, right? So at a certain point, and I think what a lot of these coaches and trainers lose is if they have 300 or 400 followers, they don't think they have shit. But what they have are 300 people that are following for who they actually are, which is the people that have 100,000 or 300,000 would kill to be able to have the 300 that were totally locked in and engaged. Because when it comes to transactions or conversions, the conversion rate on the 300 is going to be way higher than the conversion rate that's going to end up being on the 300,000.
Well, shit. I mean, in my entire business, I probably have, some people are not as active. I probably have 30 to 40 in-person clients in the grand scheme of things. I have 17, 18 online clients one-on-one, and I have 85 in the current round of a group cohort-based program I do. That's way less than 300 people in order to feed a business that treats me extremely well. You don't need those numbers at scale.
Do you think then some of the misperception is for a regular coach, do you think there's just a misconception about what coaching really is? So like you talk about people trying to scale away from the personal aspect, right? And almost becoming the spreadsheet creator. Do you think there's just a misalignment there with what people are actually hiring a coach for 90+% of the time, which is not really the training program? I mean, sure, they need a little bit of help, but as David said, AI could make that for them in 5 minutes. What are you actually bringing to the, like, what is the service of coaching? What would you define that as, and how do you think maybe that perception is misaligned in the industry right now?
I think if the coach understands it's about the relationship, and I think if the person coming in understands it's about the relationship, even if they think they're going in knowing, well, I need to learn how to work out, I need to know, what nutrition to follow. A good coach will make them realize pretty quickly that the relationship experience is actually where the magic happens, the behavioral psychology side. Clients may not realize that coming in. They may be looking for the technical answers. They'll stay for the relationship ongoing. The coaches who understand that it's about the human relationship will thrive. The coaches who are still wired to think, my skills are going to be in that, as we talked about. AI is going to crush you on just program development. But there's a misunderstanding. People just don't follow programs very well if there's not the coaching relationship, in my experience. I think there will be the type, again, who will self-select out. They're the kind of people who went for the templates, the RP templates years ago, and filled them in and were good. Those people exist, but they're probably not going to hire you for your high value coaching service anyway, because they just want the structure and they're wired to follow it.
True. So with your clients, so you said you've got some that you've been coaching for, over a decade and stuff like that. In reality, and this is probably hard to quantify, but what percentage of your impact on those people is actually to do with their lifting and their training? And what percentage of it is probably outside of that in terms of maybe what your coaching has taught them in terms of habit formation and maybe impact outside of the gym?
I'll give you 2 examples. So 2 of the clients who've been with me the longest, one of them, very, very good friend of mine, still comes to gym, not actively coaching with me. He's a paramedic. And in the early days, I don't know if you guys know any paramedics, anybody listening, but they don't have a lot of support structure in their world. They see terrible shit on a daily basis, and they don't have longevity in that career. And paramedics are paid differently in different parts of the world. In the city I'm in, they're actually paid really, really well. So it becomes a set of golden handcuffs. It's hard to get out of it. So my client and friend would tell me the stories. Sometimes he told me terrible shit, like going into the aftermath of a machete fight, stuff like that and worse. And there came a day after a couple of years where he stopped telling me the stories and never again. And he became definitely dealing with PTSD, undiagnosed. He's just an automaton on days. There were days at one point where he was in such a bad place mentally, he couldn't speak to me. We talked about it recently. This is many years ago, but we talked about it. And he joked, he's introverted, but he joked, he said he wouldn't have come in if he didn't like me or didn't want to come in. And I think those workouts were still some of the things that got him through the rough days. Anyway, he was a weapon. I had to make sure I deloaded him regularly because he would live on the bleeding edge. This was the stuff that kept his psyche intact through rough years of his training. He approached me, he never lifted before, approached me off the gym floor because I was the trainer he thought could help him get on past the tactical physical for the tactical unit for the paramedics that went into SWAT stuff. So within a couple of years, he passed that and he became the guy with the highest score in the annual runoff for this stuff. The guy's an absolute weapon. So over the years, and I remember, and this is something younger trainers will experience at some point in your career, you'll kind of do the math on how much money a client has spent when you add up the sessions over years. You're gonna be like, oh man, like I don't understand why people pay that much. Here's your example. This client, good friend of mine, his name's John. He, a few years ago, decided to go to physical therapy school. Along the way, because he's the guy who lived on the bleeding edge, I introduced him to a great physio that I refer to. And between me and the physio, it influenced him to get out of this career, go to physical therapy school. And he's probably less a year away from graduating, and his mental health's better. He hasn't had to work as much, and he's ready to step into this career that will help lifters, but also serve. He's got a great reputation in his community amongst the paramedics. And he's seen people, occupational stuff that's leaves him every day kind of hurt. One of his coworkers, a good friend of his, was in a vehicle and a tree fell on the vehicle and he was seriously injured, and he wants to work with those kind of people. So stepping into the space, and our relationship over the years led this guy to a complete career change, which saved his mental health, and now he's going to give back. And that's a perfect metaphor for what these long-term relationships can do.
Well, if we dig into that, though, you had to be accessible, right? So you have to possess the communication skills to be able to make that accessible, and you have to have the awareness, to be able to know that. So when we were talking earlier about, does the online coach need to have in-person communication or in-person skills? Those are some examples of, you have to pay attention, to the client, to, when I go back into my training days, there were some I probably didn't pay attention to at all, because it's just go through this, do this, do this. I'm watching ESPN the whole fucking time, just get this over with, but that's not being a good trainer, because you're not being aware, but then you also have to have the skill set to be able to know when to open your mouth and when not to, right? Because if you would have suspected something was wrong, but said something too soon, you just lost a client. So how did you go about acquiring those skill sets?
I don't know if I ever thought about it like proactively. I think it was just having lived a bunch of life. I think if you go through your career with an attitude of what's in it for them. We were talking before this, and I was again asking about things that you guys value in terms of, well, how can I be of service? You guys invited me down here being on this. This is amazing. But how can then I turn around and help Tom's career? How can I help Dave's career? I mean, you guys are icons in this industry, but I still look for high leverage ways to potentially give to that. How can I support Elite FTS? If you look at each person in front of you, and think about what kind of experience that they both want coming in. What have they told you? But listening for other cues, because clients rarely tell you what's really going on. That's why you ask deeper, why? And sometimes you don't start out in that place because they're not ready to reveal those things. But sometimes there's some deeper, darker stuff going on there. You create a safe space for them. You build trust. This is something that trainers don't understand right away. And I'll give you an example of this one. Some don't understand how fragile trust is and how vulnerable someone's coming in. So a pet peeve of mine, here's a hill to die on, is when coaches get pedantic about the word tone, okay? And like we got strength coaches listening here and you're like, oh, tone's not a thing. Well, okay, let me slow you down there a bit. First of all, when someone sits in front of you, because this happens a lot for Gen Pop, it's like, hey, I don't want to get too bulky. I don't want to get too muscular. I just want to tone up. And we kind of laugh in our minds going, oh, trust me, like that's never going to happen. But if we turn around and say to them, well, actually, tone is not a thing. And then you start to educate them, teach them about muscle hypertrophy, this, and nutrition, leanness, that. I mean, there may be a time for that later on. But the only answer to a brand new person who maybe they want to lose weight, and it took them, you don't know how long it took them to even consider to go in front of a trainer. And that trainer turns around right on the first meeting and in a way sort of tells them, oh, the fact that you think you just need to tone up is stupid. This is the way you tell it. And it's trainers going into advice mode right away. Oh, let me show you how smart I am. It's not the time for that. And the only answer is, I know exactly what you mean. Tell me more. Ask more questions. Go deeper. Get to understand. You don't need to get into this pedantic, well, the word tone doesn't mean, listen, motherfuckers, society uses the word tone. We fucking know. Coaches know what the word tone means when someone says, hey, I want to tone up. We know what muscle tone is. Maybe it doesn't pass the test of like hyper technical, you're not going to find it in a physiology textbook. Throw the textbook out in this particular example. Be the human in the interaction, build trust. And you have such an opportunity to build trust there or to lose it right away. Because if you make that person feel stupid, they're not going to hire you. They're going to go, and then the next person who may not have your integrity or skills, who their media says, hey, come and tone up and get your baby body back or pre-baby body back or whatever the hell. And for all their screeching that, some people do about the way people use marketing, they're going to go self-select to that person. That kind of person is going to tell them what they want to hear, but may not deliver on the experience that you could have.
Do you think in that scenario, there's just maybe a bit of a lack of empathy? Because imagine the coach is in that scenario flipped. Like maybe they go to like a counselor, say they've got like a drinking problem, whatever. And they say, oh, you know what, this X, Y, and Z is going on in my life. This has led me to having a couple of drinks every night. And the counselor turns around and goes, well, that's stupid. That's not helping anything. They're going to feel crappy, right? They don't want to talk to that person anymore, but they've made themselves vulnerable in the same way that client maybe feels vulnerable walking on that gym floor, which I think we forget for some is a terrifying experience. To reach out for help with something that has an emotional attachment deeply as well, and has just shut them straight down. And I'm sure if they were in that scenario, they'd be like, oh, well, this isn't the person for me.
I can provide a better analogy. Take that same trainer, right? And then stick them in a master's degree biomechanics class, right? They take one class, they're going to walk out of there and say, see, these fucking professors don't know a damn thing about strength and conditioning.
Yeah.
Right. Meanwhile, that's fucking biomechanics, which is strength and conditioning,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah. So they do the same thing, they just don't have awareness to be able to see that that entire conversation has zero relevance in that conversation at that time, especially a new client. Because it's when I was a trainer, one of the things that drove me fucking crazy until I could actually change it was we get a new member that come into the club, and it was a executive health club. So, and you don't know how long it took that person just to be able to walk through the door, right? It could have been 4 years, 5 years. It could have been their doctor told them to be able to do that. And the first thing we fucking did was fitness screen. Fuck. Like, here, come walk on the treadmill for 2 minutes. You can't fucking breathe. Pull your shirt up so I can take your body fat, tell you how fat you are when you already fucking know it. Yeah. Outside of like blood pressure, I'm like, the whole time I'm like, this is fucking ridiculous. I can tell kind of what shape they're in just from them walking up the stairs to get here. They should be praised, for actually making that first step. That shit can happen later, but oh my God, shit like that happens all the time.
Big pet peeve of mine, practitioners who come in, again, the movement screen stuff, thoughts on that in a second. Finding ways to tell people how dysfunctional and broken they are.
They already know that. That's why they fucking came in.
Feel it in their bones every step of the way, but you don't need to make them feel that way. And honestly, there's a lot of pathologizing of stuff that's really normal. And I know we got some stuff planned on injury risk, but like the movement screen stuff, I don't do movement screens on new clients. And there's going to be some people listening going, oh no, you need a movement screen. Okay, there's several thoughts. First of all, one, the person comes in and sits down in front of you. My first meeting with someone is a sit down. I don't actually work out with them. It's just, I want to make them comfortable, build trust. That is far more important than seeing how they move. Two, if I know their injury history, I know a lot about their psychology, I can develop a pretty, basic program template that I'm going to be adjusting as I go. I can understand that if somebody has a certain type of shoulder issue, then I'm probably not going to be having them barbell overhead pressing. They're probably going to be fine with a landmine press. That actually works for most Gen Pop. Okay, we're not talking about like elite strength athletes here, right? A strong man who have to do log press. So I can usually have a pretty good idea what they're going to tolerate versus what they can't. That's pattern recognition and coaching experience. It comes with time. And then you can adjust on the fly. But you can assess people as they move. Even clients that I've worked with for years, if you're paying attention to how they're moving, you're assessing them in real time all of the time. And if they are excited to get in, we all know that you give too much time between when they are interested and they reach out to you versus when you first get that workout in, sometimes the motivation's already worn off. You need to get them a hit of something that feels good. If you then turn around and do a very elaborate movement screen that makes them feel like they're not very fit or not very strong, or they whatever movement deficiencies, or that they're broken, then that's demoralizing. And they haven't actually got into any of the fun stuff. Not to mention, the old FMS functional movement screen shit, there's no evidence to support that has any injury predictive validity whatsoever. And you can find out how they move by watching them with what's a smart way to warm people up. Okay, you have a variety of different things relative to their injury history and their age. But one of the best things is to still do the movement pattern that we're going to work on, lightly loaded, and ramp them up at the beginning of a workout or at the beginning of that motor pattern, that joint movement when we're lifting. That's a really effective way to warm up. And you can screen them in real time as you're doing that, while getting to stuff that's fun, while also having conversation that keeps an eye on stuff that, form and injury risk. We can get into that a little bit, but stuff that like, okay, cool. If we continue to do that, that's probably not going to feel very good, but you can actually talk about the relationship stuff. So that way you're building rapport and trust right from the beginning. But I actually like getting them to lift and feel good. I'm not talking about maxing them out and testing them on day one, but I'm talking about getting them to walk away feeling good about how they moved, wins, not talk about dysfunctional shit. And let's say hypothetically, I give them a little bit too much weight in an early workout. I turn around and I say, hey, no. Oh shit, you're not that strong. Or if they feel weak, I'm like, no, I made a mistake. I gave you too much. Okay, we're going to bring that back a little bit. That's on me. Okay. And I always make them feel like, no, hey, that's my choice if and when it happens, as opposed to anything that's wrong with them.
Do you think they're just going back a little bit to the kind of conversations, like body fat calipers for the person who just walked through the door, for example? Do you think that's where the importance of lengthy coach-client relationships maybe gets understated? And what I mean by that is there are conversations you can have 6 months in, 12 months in, and so on. You absolutely cannot have 1 week in or 2 weeks in. And those 6, 12, 18-month conversations quite often will be the game changers. The dark stuff that maybe you just can't address at first. But if people don't build enough of a relationship and they never get to those mile markers, they can never really make those deep changes with those people because everything's too superficial.
Absolutely. I'll give you a really tough example of this. You may have a client in front of you who says they want to lose weight. Okay. Most people want to lose weight. And while they may say that, there may be something that being at their current level of body fat is somehow serving them. It's protecting their ego or protecting their identity. And I'm not an expert in this, but I'll at least give it a superficial treatment. And usually this is a bit more of an issue with women, but the rates of sexual violence in our society, shockingly high. People don't always talk about it. So there are some women who, sexual violence does not differentiate based on like body size and appearance. It just doesn't, right? You hear, I'm not even going to give that example. Just you hear about abhorrent shit going on, but that woman may find that being a heavier, bigger body in her mind deflects unwanted attention. So you're not going to be able to go there on day one unless they're one of those rare ones that will like tell you from day one. They probably don't feel safe or trusting on that day. But if you turn around and go, okay, cool, here's the diet plan, here's your macros, here's what we're going to do, exercise, what have you. But if there's something in there protecting them from something that's deeply rooted, goes way into the past, the behavior is not going to change because they're going to instinctively want to protect themselves from this thing that's a far greater issue. It may take time before that gets revealed. You can't really ask right away. You can't put that question in a screen. Hey, have you ever been X? You're not going there. So yes, you have to build the trust over time. And then maybe you get to a point where that maybe comes to the surface, or maybe you just make them feel really safe in that experience. And then they might arrive at the point where they're ready to. But if they don't decide they're ready to actually like do the things that changes the nutrition to lose the weight, nothing's going to change. And no matter how smart you are with the numbers and even your coaching, it's not going to change your underlying beliefs and attitudes and behaviors.
Well, that can be applied to any training goal or any goal that anybody puts out to you. You know, if they say that they want to get stronger so they can be a better lifter, I mean, you can't broach the conversation of why is that important to you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because all those things, if they want to lose weight, why do they want to lose weight? You know, where they're going to say just because they want to lose weight, but that may not actually be the reason. You know, the reason could be, you know, social acceptance. It could be to be able to move better. It could be all these other underlying variables. You know, why do you want to be a world champion powerlifter? It's probably not to be the world champion powerlifter. There's all these underlying variables that are in there. And as a good coach, you want to kind of uncover those over a period of time, because the likelihood of somebody achieved or whatever perceived goal in the real world is pretty fucking low, if that's the stated goal. Like, I want to be, you know, all-time world record holder, whatever it's going to be. The odds of that happening are fucking very extremely low. So you hope, and it usually isn't, that isn't what the real goal is, because you can still achieve what that real deep-rooted goal is without hitting whatever that metric. There's a difference between a metric and a goal, you know, or a drive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's getting more into the drives. That shit isn't going to happen on day one. It may not even happen after fucking 10 years. Mm-hmm. You know, I've had people that I know personally that after fucking a decade, it's like, this is why the fuck you've been doing this shit all this time? You know, had this been unveiled fucking 8 years ago, you wouldn't have hip replacements and all this other shit that you put yourself through to try to accumulate this one thing that could have been achieved in a multitude of different ways.
In the experience for both of you, though, how often do you find also that, you know, you have that person, world record powerlifter or whatever, or wants to be, maybe they don't even know what the number is.
They don't. And subconsciously, I believe they do. Mm-hmm. Right? It's deep rooted, right? Subconsciously they do, but it's going to take time. But hopefully it's figured out, you know, before the achievement or not achievement. Because if they, on the flip side, let's say they achieve it, they didn't satisfy what that drive actually was. You know, which anybody will tell you that. You know, they win the Super Bowl and all that. It's great for like a day, but then on to the next. You know, it's like, well, I thought that was your dream since you were like 14, you know, or 13 or 12 or whatever it is. There's underlying reasons that are in there, and good coaches will kind of uncover that, because when you can uncover that, that's when you're going to get the best out of them.
Yeah. And, you know, that as well is going to take time and trust. Like, you can't, maybe you are the person that helps that individual dig down and find out what that root motivation is, but that's going to take time, and you have to know them to a certain level to do that, right? Like, I coach a lot of competitive powerlifters, and very often the question eventually will come up, well, why is it you compete? Really? Mm-hmm. And they can't answer it most of the time, not truthfully. But there's a superficial answer to it. But it's like, well, if that's what, and because, you know, you follow up, you say, well, if that's what you do it for, why do you not just max out in the gym or whatever? And they can't answer. And you're like, okay, I've done my bit. I've planted the seed, which will be the same as, well, why do you want to lose those 10 pounds? Well, what is it about that actually ticks a box for you? And then you start going down that rabbit hole. Well, actually, you know, I was the fat kid at school or whatever. But, well, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. You've just, you know enough to just ask that one or two questions that makes them dig down, and then all of a sudden, hopefully it comes spilling out. But again, if you're the guy who's trying to scale and take the human element out, that's gone, right?
Well, I could not argue, but I could put in there, and it would kind of segue into this next topic, is the further they are away from figuring that out, the closer they are to actually getting hurt.
Yes.
Right? And in any level. from Gen Pop all the way up to the top. So when it comes to predicting, preventing injuries, what are your thoughts there?
Oh, there's a ton there. I know that we had a lot planned here. I mean, we can start with even the language of preventing injuries, right? And I think there's two sides to this. One is there's the part of our world that gets a little pedantic about saying, oh, you can't prevent injuries. And that's actually pretty true. There's a lot of things we can influence. There's a lot of things we can't. So I personally don't use the language prevent injuries for one simple reason, because it implies a promise that we can't inherently keep. Now there's coaches out there who will say, well, I do all this and this and this, my clients never get hurt. Really? Or is it just like you don't talk about that one time? Like, and I'll put myself up on the table for this one. I had an old client worked out with me for years, and second set of squatting, smaller guy, was involved in jiu-jitsu, kickboxing type stuff. Second set, 185, 6 rep, and all of a sudden feels something in his knee. So I'm in position. I, pull that bar off him right away. I'm paying attention, unlike a lot of coaches. And that probably maybe saved from a more serious injury right in that moment. So anyway, but something wasn't right. As it turns out, he did suffer a tear of his lateral meniscus, right? And so a lot of coaches hide away from that because like, oh, I never got my clients hurt. It's like, are you sure? I'm not going to say a name, but there's like one guy I know I don't fuck with who would like, brag about that sort of thing. And meanwhile, oh, there's a video of you out there on the internet somewhere where one of your clients is like bench pressing with a fat bar and his grip slips and the thing comes out and crushes his rib cage, right? Are you sure about that? Anyway, so with this client, goes and gets checked out with a doc right away. And I think it was an orthopedic surgeon, but the orthopedic surgeon turned around and said, this is actually a really common injury with kickboxers. Right. So my client, he was back training with me in under a week. We did a ton of upper body stuff. And this will get into something we were planning as well. But a lot of people will use injuries to avoid the gym entirely. But there's actually so much you can do. There's actually a lot of really cool research on a phenomenon called cross education, which is training with an injured limb. If you suffer an injury, anybody who's coached for any length of time, you've had the client that shows up one day, you've got this workout plan. Their wrist is broken. They sprained an ankle. One of my clients, she took a fall on ice about a month and a half ago, and she broke her tibia and fibula and a tarsal in her foot. Now, that's actually a pretty serious deal, and she couldn't come back right away. But there's a ton you can do. One of my favorite stories, one of my clients, first day in Mexico, he's running on a pool deck in flip-flops, slips, goes down a set of concrete stairs, again, breaks his ankle, right? Ends up in a Mexican hospital for the rest of his trip. Shitty story. Comes back, what do? A ton of upper body training, right? Again, you have to think, okay, cool. Can he like carry heavy dumbbells over, kick him up with his knees and do shoulder press with them? Not right away, no. But I could sit him in a leg press and do single leg press. I can sit him in a leg extension. I can sit him in a hamstring curl. There's a whole bunch of other stuff I could still do with him. And what a lot of research has shown is if you train the healthy limb, then there's a neural stimulus of the injured limb that actually helps spare the muscle strength and thickness loss of that injured limb. And is that going to be 100%? You get the power lifter who like rips a quad tendon clean off. Guess what? That's pretty catastrophic. They're not going to be able to walk back in the gym right away, but it still is going to make a difference, even if it won't save that person 100%. But for the Gen Pop, we're trying to keep the habit. We're trying to keep that person because, okay, cool. There's like the leg itself, and there's the hypertrophy or strength goals, but there's the metabolic health goals, and there's the mental health experience of it. You take someone who suffers an injury of this nature, and then they're out of the gym for 3 or 4 months, and especially if they've got serious metabolic health goals, maybe they're a bit older, maybe the metabolic health, they came to you because that's a concern. Guess what? They can't afford 3 or 4 months out of there, right? Maybe it's someone who goes because their mental health, really, really critical. 3 to 4 months of being injured, unable to do all your regular everyday stuff, whatever limitations it is, and then losing your gym habit, you think that's going to be okay for the status quo of your mental health? No. So it's really important for coaches to actually understand this. And I think most coaches just figure this shit out anyway. I figured this shit out, doing this over years. And then I got into the research on it. I'm like, oh, cool. There's actually a cool precedent here. And I actually turned it into a written resource that I originally had published it's on Kabuki Strength, but it's also on my website now. And it's got program and goes into the research, but in a way that the everyday person or the coach could access. Because the research is out there, but I couldn't find a formal resource that went through everything. So I built it just based on practical experience meets wisdom, and anybody can have that if they want it.
Well, even more downstream, the circulation of the training session is going to help the injury.
Yeah.
Even if it's, not the crossbody,
Yeah.
that you're talking about, which does exist. But every time I would hear that, I always think, well, yeah, okay. But even if they don't do that, if that's not the main goal and they don't do anything, just going in the gym and getting their heart rate up and having the blood circulate throughout their body is going to help the fucking thing heal.
Totally.
More than just being bedridden for 4 months.
Yeah.
It's kind of like common
When
sense.
you have a client who's, let's say that broken ankle example in Mexico, how do you find a balance then between striving enough for progress whilst allowing it to heal? So do you take the actual neurological and physical demand of healing the injury into account when doing their programming? Do you look at them in kind of a hindered manner in terms of global recovery? Or is it they can handle the same amount of volume, intensity, whatever, now it's just localized away from that injury site?
I mean, you got to look at the population you're dealing with. So if you're dealing with a high-level athlete, and again, those people are probably under the guidance of a good physical therapist anyway. So I think it's actually really smart to work with the physical therapist involved, and they're probably the one who has the rehabilitation plan for that. And you're probably going to have boundaries to follow anyway. That's just a smart thing. But for almost everybody else, it's very unlikely that they're actually going to live on the bleeding edge of what they can recover from, because they're healing from an injury. That demand requires some recovery. So outside of extreme examples, I'm probably not worried about that. Yes, you have to take that into account, but it's probably more the practical implications of getting them in the gym. You got someone coming in on crutches. So is your gym accessible to someone who's on crutches? And I used the example earlier of like kicking up dumbbells. Someone who's at a boot cast on something that's relatively recent, and they're big bench presser. Are they picking up dumbbells and walking them over? That's not even going to be a thing. So they're probably machine pressing and bench pressing. Okay, cool. No big deal. Getting into and out of stuff, getting down to the ground and back up again from things, is that an option for that person? So you just look at the practical implications of what's in front of you. But I think for the most part, like we talked about, it's going to be very hard, I think, to do as much volume that it's going to impair the recovery process. I think it's still focused on their metabolic health, their circulation. And I think that even as we talk about the power of cross education, I think that's still kind of secondary. And people tend to, once injury is healed, they tend to bounce back pretty quick anyway. So I'm just trying to make sure that they keep the habit, they stay in the gym. And if then they start showing signs, okay, cool, we need to like deload you or pull this back a little bit, we adjust when we have a person in that position. Otherwise, I think it's training as usual. And then there's the old bodybuilding approach. What did old school bodybuilders always do when they got something hurt? They worked on weak points. So you are going to try to be pretty progressive on the other things. And if someone's having wins based on, especially if they're hurt, but you can give them a win. A coworker of mine, former client of mine, she plays soccer. She ripped an ACL off. Not good. So what did she end up doing? She went full bore into working on her chin-ups and her bench press and getting some new bests in that while she's going through the rehabilitation process. She did have surgery on the ACL, and that kept her motivated and going and kept the wins piling up, right?
Yeah, I think sometimes when we do the seminars here and stuff, I usually do a section on specialization training, which I think is a really cool tool, which basically you just described there, right? And sure, it's got applications, but I think the best application is in those scenarios where you have people who are injured, and it's like, let's just take the focus off what you can't do and on what you can do, and then all of a sudden, like you said, you're stacking wins, keeping good habits going. And then when that, whatever it is healed, that can always flip. And maybe then you go into like a lower body phase where that's most of your training and you kind of catch it up. And then, let's say there's 3 months of maybe an upper focus and 3 months of a lower focus. You've now made good progress in both over 6 months, as opposed to just being like, oh shit, well, I can't really do much of anything. I'm probably wasting 6 months, right?
Yeah. And maintenance volume as a stimulus for anything is surprisingly low. So is it really any different than doing that with someone who's not injured? Probably not really. It probably doesn't require a tremendous amount of volume to at least maintain what someone has for their lower body, if it's a lower body injury, and then just go fucking crazy with upper body training and make progress there. Yeah.
So when you're dealing with these types of injuries, what would be the typical modifications outside of, say, the exercise selection, because they physically can't do them? What other modifications might you be bringing in? You know, for that person with the broken ankle, would there be methodologies where you just bring down the training load so that you don't have to load as many plates, for example? Or maybe there would be less exercise variation just to deal with walking around the gym less. You know, what sort of things do you take into consideration to make that program not just productive, but also kind of less difficult or less strenuous to follow for that person?
All right, let's use an example of a broken wrist. Okay, so you got a broken arm, broken wrist. Okay, and that person probably can't grip onto stuff. So safety squat bar is going to be one of your favorite things in the universe. So, I mean, assuming they're even, you know, they can't do an RDL. Okay, cool. Can't hold onto a bar, do RDL. Fine. So guess what? Safety bar, good morning. Game on, you're good. Maybe they can't get their wrist into a position where they're holding onto a regular barbell. Again, your safety bar squatting. There's just a ton of stuff you can do there. You could mess around with cuffs. So let's say it's a wrist injury and you're still doing something like, you know, a shoulder lateral or basic fly type motions. You can still train a lot of the upper body isolation movements, just doing it from a cuff, side laterals, pec flies, reverse pec flies, etc. So it depends on the nature of the specific injury, but there's a ton of workarounds. It's individual to what's the nature of the injury and what's the joint.
In your opinion, does this, because right now the idea that's very much in vogue, should we say, is optimal. Everything must be optimal, right? And anything then that is not optimal is almost worthless, right? There's kind of like this one shining exercise per body part or whatever. Is this where getting away from that mentality can be really helpful, do you think? Where like, yeah, sure, maybe a bicep curl with a cuff is not optimal or whatever, but for the person with the broken wrist or carpal tunnel, whatever, it might be optimal for them. So as a coach, having the broadest possible toolbox and not worrying about optimal actually may be the better strategy for most.
Optimal is going to be different. You said it, right? It's what's optimal for them. Optimal is different for every single person, every different context. You know, and even what we think is probably optimal, again, pay attention to the smartest people in the industry who are talking about studies. And I think there's a lot of valuable stuff in the research out there. But then all of a sudden, one study comes out that slightly contradicts the body of evidence and people get excited about it. Or you get some people who, pet peeve of mine, who don't have a background in formal academia or like the education side, and then they're, quote, interpreting research. You get a lot of talking heads interpreting research and they're experts, and I find they're just parroting a lot of the stuff from other people who are also pretending to read research. And okay, I mean, that doesn't invalidate research by any means, but I think you just kind of have to aggregate what's out there. You can do that, or you can just use common sense with the person in front of you. Again, lean on the human side of stuff. Optimal is definitely going to be what they can show up and do on any given day, and an experience that keeps them in the gym. Another example is, you know, overly optimized stuff. I think if you want to make progress, I think we should try to be, you know, relatively speaking, to the individual, optimizing their hypertrophy, optimizing their strength. And outside of, you know, high end, like some of the athletes you guys are dealing with in here, hypertrophy and strength run more concurrently than sometimes people like to say. Because, I mean, what is strength, really? Strength is going to come from kind of one of three places, right? I'm oversimplifying. You know, initially it's motor learning. So you get the beginner in the gym and all of a sudden, like set 3 versus set 2, all of a sudden they're stronger. They didn't build muscle fiber there. And I don't think that they got more efficient at the neural, I'll get to that, but they just learned the fucking motor pattern, right? And their body sort of figured it out. So that's kind of one, is a skill development. 2, it's taking the existing amount of structure you have, aka muscle mass, and just getting a little bit closer to the red line. That is peak strength performance-based stuff. It's taking people where they already are. You're dealing with weight class stuff where you can't necessarily put on more weight, and just getting them better at getting near that, like grandma pulls a car off a child type adrenalized, you know, super strength, right? Which wouldn't be healthy for most people to live there all of the time because they'd shatter their joints. But you're trying to get those athletes to get into the red line enough that they can win. And then 3, it's building the structure. So it's actually putting more muscle on, which is your structure that can tolerate load and produce force. Okay. Oversimplification. Let me get myself back on track. So give me the question again.
That's a great question.
So we're talking about optimizing.
Yeah, so having the idea of having a singular optimal exercise is kind of demonizing too many things that are going to be useful in a lot of
I don't think it fucking exists, right? I think it's all contextual. So, but I do think looking at things through the lens of trying to build as much muscle as possible and strength as possible, that's just good for life. It's like you're dealing with the older person who you're trying to make sure that they don't fall. Like fall injuries past a certain age are catastrophic. They will ruin people's lives or kill them outright, or they'll die in the aftermath of all of a sudden going from pretty active to being sedentary from a broken hip or a broken femur. How do we lessen the risk of that? Get them strong, put muscle on them. Right? It's not crazy standing on a Bosu ball type training, whatever. And I think getting them up and down from the ground is a really good skill for older adults. But if they've got more muscle and they have more strength, which for them, it's going to run concurrent in the training, then their balance is going to be better. Balance is going to be a function of strength for the most part. They're less likely to fall, or if they do fall, their bones and their muscles are stronger. There's more structure there. They're less likely to suffer an injury, but their motor control is better. So they also may be able to catch themselves and brace against a fall if they do. But do we need specialized training in that? Not really.
I think there's 2 pieces to this that are very deep rooted. And one you kind of already touched on, it's optimal to what context, right? Because every time we'll see optimal or effective or whatever it is, it's the context is always left blank, so I guess reader or viewer can insert whatever they want subconsciously and it makes for better clickbait. And then underneath that, what is minimal, what's maximal, right? Because there's, as you kind of touched on with injury standpoint, there's a maintenance volume, which is way lower than what people think. And the maintenance volume could be applied if, somebody's workload or their life is just too hectic. What they need to actually do to maintain their current state is way less than what they think it is. Way less. But you can make the mistake by not hitting the minimal, which say it's once a week or whatever it's going to be. But once you can kind of define what's the minimal, what's the maximal, then you never fall under the minimal. And then most people are never going to fall over the maximal anyhow. But on the high-end athletes, they could, but within those realms. And then that's the basic of all program design, no matter what it is. But if you don't look at the contextual, the optimal, then everything else is just falls apart.
True.
It has 0 meaning whatsoever.
Sure. I mean, also, like you said, it's so contextual. Like what? If we're worrying about optimal, it's like, well, sure, you've got your competitive powerlifter who wants to get their squat up. What's optimal for their squat is, come in and squat 3 or 4 days a week. For a while, that will be optimal for your squat. But for how long? And what's the detriment to everything else that you do? And if that worked, we'd all be here training Bulgarian method every day, right? And we'd all be great and whatever. So the optimal to what and over what time frame? Because usually you could probably make the argument, and I'd want your input on this. What is optimal for your goal that's in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years? Is the strategy that gets you that is usually not the strategy that is optimal right now for your progress, as in gets you the most accelerated progress right now. So if we only ever looked at the yards in front of us and said, what's optimal to get me from A to B, we might never get to D, E, or F, because we don't ever use the strategies that will build the base, for want of a better word, to actually get us there. And if we're all just worrying about that all the time, rather than maybe investing in your client's longer term progress, you never have the right lens to do those things.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying what you're watching, make sure to take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe.
Do you think?
Well,
I guess the question is more fighting against the idea of doing what is supposedly best right now versus what is best for your client or your athlete's long-term progress. And as a coach, your ability to stand back and look at their career or lifting path, whatever, over the longer term and be objective.
I mean, I suspect that if the primary objective is a timeline thing of a competition, then what is best for them right now to rehabilitate that injury is probably what's best for them long term anyway. I'm not even convinced that there's a discrepancy between those two things.
Well, to give a specific example to kind of tie into what you were saying is, if we're just going to talk hypertrophy based and say 3 sets of 8, right? With progressive overload, you know, most people are going to think, okay, week 1 is going to be 100 pounds, week 2, 105. And they're looking at the weekly increments where progressive overload, it's not stamped as that has to be that. You may use the same weight for 3 sets of 8 for 6 months, but the first time that you do it, 3 sets of 8 are going to be hard, but months later, the 3 sets of 8 are going to be easy. When I was first introduced to weight training in junior high school, we did 3 sets of 10 with a fucking stupid universal machine. And normally you couldn't do the 3 sets of 10 because you picked the weight wrong. So it'd be like 6, 7, or 10, 8, 7, or whatever it was. Then we would go up when we could actually do all the 10s, right? The weight didn't fucking change, you know, until that was met. But sometimes people will look at that specific, at that progressive overload of this has to change every single week. And then when that burns out, I got to change the exercise or whatever it's going to be, instead of realizing that that same weight it's not a weekly thing. It could be, this is the weight for a month, especially if it's an accessory type of thing. And then when it gets easier, you take that up, right? So again, it's playing into that minimal and that maximal. But when you're looking at a lot of the optimal stuff, especially with the hypertrophy training, this seems to be stamped as like a golden rule, that there has to be some kind of micro increment every single time you do the movement. And that's false. It can still be progressive overload over. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be pure weight.
Yeah, so it's like understanding the fundamental principles can help.
I think one of the things you're saying in there, correct me if I'm wrong, is you just pay attention to the intensity of the experience. Like if you do that, like I love when coaches get on with this bullshit. It's like three sets of 10 is stupid. I'm like, why? If someone's doing 3 sets of 10 and they've got like 8 reps in reserve on it, okay, cool. Well, that's stupid. That's not for progression, right? But if you do 3 sets of 10 of something, and let's say you're already warmed up and then that's your working weights or whatever, or secondary exercise. And if your intensity is within the, let's say 0 to 5 reps, and you like really know where you fail, or probably more likely like a 0 to 2 rep range, and you've got 3 pretty hard sets, that's probably more, again, it depends on the entire workout. It's probably more than enough volume, and it's certainly in the right intensity range to make progress on. And as long as you're not hitting each of those sets to like really extreme failure, well, it's probably also very recoverable, right? I mean, people like to argue about volume versus intensity. I think that there's a lot of status building and brand building, which the brand building side, fine, but you see this weird argument now with a lot of coaches online, and it's kind of almost like this low volume argument. It's like the Mike Menser stuff all over. And I'm not a hardcore expert in that stuff, but if I'm not mistaken, Mike and most of the people who are talking about that style of training built their muscle mass off of more traditional bodybuilding style stuff that had higher volumes in it. And then I've noticed almost entirely they're branding around this like lower volume thing. It's like a lot of like 5 to 6 reps for hypertrophy. I'm like, if we're going to get the kind of intensity range with 5 to 6 reps of something, I mean, for some compounds, okay, I'm just not sold on that idea. And I know that a lot of people are talking about research that says it, but I still think a lot of those people built their physiques on traditional higher volume stuff anyway. And it's a lot easier to maintain muscle mass or even make some progress as an advanced lifter on those protocols, sure. But if you take a lot of compound stuff and you're loading to near failure with weight that hits 5 to 6 reps to like 1 to 2 reps in reserve, guess what? That's really fucking heavy in most contexts. And, you know, I certainly think that can be rough on joints if you're doing that almost all the time as you're training. I think it's a really good idea to spend some time training in those ranges. And I think that stuff that's like slightly more neurological strength work, that's heavy and lower rep, once you're properly warmed up to it and you're experienced enough, you have the skill. I think that's fantastic. I think everybody should do that. But I find it very odd to make the suggestion that all of your hypertrophy, optimized hypertrophy training needs to be in like a 5 to 6 rep range to like 0 to 1 reps in reserve. I'm like, I just don't think that actually is practical. I'm not convinced it's optimal. So I don't know.
Do you think the hard truth that no one wants to admit is just that they all work?
I actually think that's it. I think it's volume meets intensity. I think what is it? It's tension on muscle, right?
Yeah.
We used to think there was like, okay, these three things, like there's mechanical tension, and then there's metabolic stress, and then there's muscle damage. Well, research now points to that muscle damage and metabolic stress are probably more concurrent byproducts of just good tension training and volume anyway. And we know that too much muscle damage actually impairs and slows the recovery process. So we don't want to do too much of that shit. And then metabolic stress, a good pump. Again, I think it's just, hey, it's a sign you're actually doing smart training. You're probably recovered, you're fueled well, you're hydrated well, and you're putting good tension on muscle. Yes, I think that, I'm not an expert in blood flow restriction training. It definitely seems like a smart strategy. You were talking earlier about stuff that people could do if they're injured. You're dealing with lighter loads, you do some occlusion stuff, the metabolites, whatever. That actually seems to, based on the research as I understand it, it doesn't do as much for strength, but it actually does work for hypertrophy. So that can be a useful tactic. You just gotta know what the fuck you're doing, right? You don't want to end up with compartment syndrome for injury stuff, right? Or for whatever reason that someone can't load heavier, maybe your joints are just feeling beaten up. You could do a phase of that, great. But at the end of the day, I think people should be chasing mechanical tension to relatively close to failure. Sure, there's a bit of an argument whether you have to hit absolute failure. I think it's a really good idea to spend at least a little bit of time, maybe the last set of a few exercises a workout to hit failure. Failure on like a barbell squat, probably not as smart as an idea as like maybe doing it. Maybe it's a pendulum squat machine. You get buried in the bottom of that thing, no big deal. Or leg extensions, right? Cool. Fail on that. In fact, it's probably really important that you fail at the end of your leg extensions, at the end of your workout. And then do a little bit of past failure training. Maybe it's, okay, if you're the guy who likes curls, I like curls. Bicep training, great. Fun stuff. Or shoulder laterals, cool. Do a drop set or two of your last set of that stuff. That's going to put a lot of tension on muscle, accumulate volume. It won't be that hard to recover from that level of intensity for a smaller muscle group. I also think that for the crowd that are afraid of training to failure, I actually think that you need to experience that because it's part of, people worry about recovery, sure. But you also have to develop the stamina and the mindset to actually push to really hard training if you actually want to excel anyway. So I think you actually do need to spend some serious time in that, be smart about it, just so you develop that skill, the constitution to tolerate hard training.
Dave's mentioned many times like the importance of anchoring things like RPE. And do you think failure training, even if it's just done at the end of a workout like that, one set on leg extension, plays a role for your gen pop and things like that? Because how can I judge RPE 9 or 8? And also coaches are saying that language, assuming their clients know what that means for a start. But if I've never hit failure, never hit 10, how on earth do I know what 8 feels like?
I don't even think most advanced lifters are that good. I think I can't remember. I think there's some research on this. They're not even necessarily that good at knowing what true failure feels like. So that's actually a good argument to try to get closer to it. And then there's the old example, if you pull out a gun and put it in someone's head, sure, you're dealing with adrenaline, that red line granny flipping cars type stuff. But if someone thinks they're at near failure or failure at like a set of cable rows and all of a sudden the gun comes out, guess what? They're going to find 5 or 6 more reps in there. So, and that's, at least it's sort of an illustration of the fact that we probably weren't as close to failure as we thought. And there's something in our brain that's screaming at us to stop because it's a preventative mechanism to living on that red line. And sure, there's injury preventative benefits in theory with that because that goes into just managing the load and intensity of your training. But, I think that most people probably aren't as good at knowing how close they are to failure. I think it's a skill you can develop. But I think biasing within, I think this is why, because if I understand the research correctly, it looks like we can build muscle pretty effectively about within 5 reps of failure. But I think most people argue for like 0 to 2 because most people just aren't that good at knowing at 5 if they're really close to failure.
Sure. If I can just drag you back to the injury part again, if you don't mind.
Please.
When you have that client now who has an injury and is, for all intents and purposes, is now recovered. Let's say physiotherapy has discharged them or whatever. They're functional, but let's say they've had the broken ankle. Maybe that's a 2 or a 3 month process of getting back to where they've been given that green flag to do what they want. What's your process then with reintroducing the movements and the patterns and the loading on those structures? And what parameters do you use to know whether you're under or overdoing it for that client?
I think there's a bunch of stuff here. I said earlier, I still think it's a really good idea to have a working relationship with the physical therapist they're dealing with. So that way you have what they're saying as well. And I don't even fuck with physical therapists if they don't value strength training anyway. The ones that only deal on the passive stuff. No, they actually have to understand resistance training. Okay. That's a non-starter. But if they do, they're probably going to be able to guide you. I think also too, you're probably dealing more it's less about optimization. It's probably more about the client's mindset and fear. And you're going to have almost one of two extremes. One is the ones who are scared shitless of doing anything with it. And so you actually have to just make them feel safe. And maybe that is, instead of going right back to, barbell squatting, maybe there's still more leg extensions. Maybe it's lighter leg press. Maybe it's having them pushing sleds around or whatever. So they're actually getting exposed to graduating progressive loads. Ultimately, when you're dealing with injury risk, it's not that different from training. It's just you've moved the load intensity exposure of the injured tissue, or even like as it's coming back, just less load and intensity, right? Because that's what rehabilitation is. You just have to, it's, force acting on tissue. What's the tissue tolerance state of that tissue? If the tissue is injured or recovering from injury, well, it can tolerate less stress and force. So you actually just have to bring that down. You can probably, if the client feels safe with it, do the same type of exercises. You just have to dial down the load intensity. And then like you would progressively overload anybody anyway, you're just seeing how they recover, how they're feeling. Are they feeling pain? Are they feeling confident? And you're gradually going to build it back up again. So it's just almost like, it's not like starting over, but it's like starting at an earlier point in their training career, and you just bring them back through the same process. I think that's probably fun.
I assume you're looking for ways to maximize your training. I'm Dave Tate from elitefts.com. I started Elite FTS in 1998 because there was a lack of training information online. 20 years later, we continue with that because we have over information of content online. So at Elite FTS, we filter that information down to be able to provide you with the best information you need as a strength athlete, coach, recreational lifter, or washed up meathead. Content's changed over the years. So we used to have tons of blogs, tons of articles and such. Now we have the Table Talk podcast, we have articles, we have eBooks, and we have webinars and all kinds of other information on the site. So head over to elitefts.com, click on the education tab, and you're going to find more articles than you know what to do with, but use the search queue and you'll find what you need.
Fine. Then you get the people who are like, want to go balls to the wall right away because their identity is rooted in how many strength athletes go back too much too fast and then they get hurt again. Best predictor of future injury is past injury. So why? Well, I mean, is that tissue 100% fully recovered? So sometimes you actually have to put, and they can still do with the same exercises. I don't think that's a problem, but you may have to then just put guardrails on them and boundaries. But that goes back to the coaching relationship and having the trust, because we've all worked with a client that will like break themselves if you don't put the boundaries on them. And athletes who are used to performing at a high level, who are coming back off of health issues or injuries, they're terrible for that shit. So you need to have that trust in place to keep them from overdoing it too fast. I hope I've answered the question.
Yeah. In your experience, when you're dealing with this type of thing, how much of residual injury, or should we say future injury risk, comes from not the original injury, but doing that process poorly or not at all? So for example, when the gym that we were at back in the UK was linked to a hospital that did a lot of like hip replacements, shoulder replacements, and a lot of people got discharged from physio, but then they never did anything after that. They were usually the people that ended up presenting with more problems later on, maybe having another hip replacement. So in your experience, when you're dealing with people with pec tears and all this type of thing, how much of whether you get injured again in future is actually down to doing that maybe post physio, we can call it rehab, but kind of reintroduction training well?
I think what you're describing is just load management. As an overall concept, every coach should really go down the rabbit hole of understanding load management. It's just how much load intensity and volume, and what's the allostatic load of someone's life. So I'll define that for anyone that's not familiar. It's all of the stresses someone experiences. It's life stress. Are they dealing with a bad relationship, a divorce? Do they have a sick kid? How much are they sleeping? How's their hydration? How's their nutrition? So you're going to have inputs and outputs. So this is especially important for the person who will go into the gym and lives on the bleeding edge of what they can recover or steps over it. If that person is used to a high level of performance and all of a sudden their sleep goes out the window or their stress level increases, well, what they were recovering from is no longer they have less recovery. So they actually may have to dial back the intensity, but that intensity might be the thing that's important for their mental health. So you have to actually consider your entire allostatic load of your life when you're dealing with this stuff. But with load management, it is just making sure, again, it's the basis of how much load, how much intensity, how much training volume someone's dealing with. And with injuries, well, why did they get injured in the first place? So a lot of people will say, oh, it's form. And I think load management is a problem. When people think injuries are caused by form, there's not really strong research to point to that. I'm not willing to say there's no relationship. I don't think so. I think you can, and I think this is, I've heard it in lots of places, Jordan Shallow, it's like load, injuries happen when load, force exceeds tissue tolerance. That makes a lot of sense. So in one sense, if someone's doing an exercise and the form is a little shoddy, well, is there something compensating that isn't as strong and that's getting exposed to more load and volume? Well, sure, but is that a form issue? Yes, but it's also a load management issue. That tissue is being exposed to more load. So that's actually a good reason to try to like make sure the form works, because what are we trying to do? Form matters because we're trying to target a certain muscle in theory, right? And develop strength. So look at it through that lens, and that should address the whatever compensating tissue is getting overexposed to some stimulus that it can't recover from, increasing injury risk. I think that covers that. But I think if we start looking at the total volume and the total recovery and someone's entire life, that's probably going to be a really good foundation for assessing whether injury risk is. Some things are beyond our control. Genetics. Some people have more genetic predisposition to certain things. You know, how many powerlifters have you guys been around who had back issues and just genetically they were more prone to a back injury, a disc injury? That's just reality, right? Some of it, it's low intensity stuff. Some of it's just freak accidents. Sometimes it's luck, right? And are we controlling for the stuff we can control, which is the load management? Are we controlling for sleep? Are we controlling for hydration? Are we controlling for fueling? Cool. So we can only just do the best we can with that. I just don't think there's any guarantees that we could say, hey, you'll never get hurt again.
So in that article you wrote for us, which by the way was very good, people should go read that. Is this what you're referring to when you're talking about intrinsic and extrinsic risk factors when looking
Absolutely, yeah. And it's why it goes back to why I personally try to avoid the language of, hey, prevent injury, because I just don't think we can guarantee that. And if you do it and then a client gets hurt, then, well, they're going to look at you. Right. So I always try to have the conversation and say, listen, you know, especially for the Gen Pop person who might be worried about getting hurt, because 90% of the people I've ever sat with who Gen Pop want to come in and work out, they will say some form of, I want to learn how to lift safely. And I don't turn around and be like, oh, you got nothing to worry about, blah, blah, blah. No, it's instead going, there's always a risk that someone could get hurt in this environment. It is always a risk. Most injuries are minor, but what do we know? You're sitting in front of me because you know you don't feel great. What really guarantees, and I'll use a strong word there, guarantees that we will slowly feel worse, that we will degrade our health, we will just feel awful, is being completely sedentary, progressively gaining body fat, watching our metabolic health decline, and our movement decline. That is terrible for a physical and mental health or metabolic health. So you can stay out of the gym and avoid any risk of actually getting hurt in the gym. But like stupid shit, like a year ago, guys, as you get older, girls, whatever, I for years just go up and down stairs fast. It's just a thing I do. But carpet stairs and socks, one of my feet slipped, came out from under me, and I just wasn't in a position to really catch myself fully, caught myself by upper body, but my right leg, it got pinned under me. Right, my knee buckled back, and I actually hurt something in my knee, and so it was probably a grade 1 ACL sprain and probably a quarter post injury. My friend, Dr. Sam Spinelli, took a look at me, and he's really smart. And I knew something was wrong right away. Anyway, so, went through some of the stuff he put me through and built back up. And certain exercises, like, funny enough, like just a barbell squat doesn't feel super good, but a pendulum squat deep, knee sleeve on, feels incredible. I can do split squats, no problem. I can reverse lunge, deficit reverse lunge, no problem. Romanian deadlifts, no problem at all. Leg extension stuff. For whatever reason, just like body weight squatting even, it just doesn't love how that feels. Okay, cool. I found a whole bunch of stuff that works for me. But life happens. I fucking fell on the stairs. Now I like slow it down and I hold a handrail. Yeah, it sounds ridiculous, but guess what? Fucking slipped and I hurt myself. But I hurt myself in my everyday life and I'm pretty strong now. Given how strong I am, it probably prevented a more serious injury. Probably. But man, getting in the gym is still one of the safest and healthiest things. And in the article, I quoted some statistics. Injury rates are usually quoted in injuries per 1,000 hours of an activity. And that includes everything from minor shit to the big stuff. And it's mostly minor shit. And for the best proxies we have for general strength and conditioning and working out are bodybuilding, powerlifting, even CrossFit. And the research on those shows up that those things tend to have 1.5 to about 4 injuries per 1,000 hours of participation. So 2 thoughts. One, most people will accumulate those kind of hours over their lifetime. So guess what? Injuries are probably going to happen, minor shit along the way. If you're pushing yourself pretty hard, it'll happen. You'll have aches, pains, you'll break shit. But on the other hand, that's actually a really, really statistically low risk of injury. And we know what the alternative is. So I still think that resistance training for everyday is literally one of the safest. The benefits so drastically outweigh any negative impacts. But that's the conversation that we're having with most people. That's the problem.
Sure.
Is their fear of even just doing it.
And you mentioned, well, this is way back now, I'm sorry, but that you don't do movement screening and stuff like that. So 2 questions I have in relation to that. How do you determine for that individual client, assuming we are assessing injury risk kind of as a whole, how do you accept what is acceptable in terms of injury risk? Because it can never be 0 for that individual person, because that's going to differ, right? And then when you're looking at that person, when you're doing your assessment, you're talking for them, what variables are the biggest ones that play into what their personal injury risk rate or percentage, whatever would be in your opinion?
I think first of all, you have to know your client. You have to listen. You can ask them explicitly or just pay attention. I'll use example. I've got 2 guys in their mid 70s that I train. And one of them, his name's Larry. I put him on my social media a lot, strong as fuck. And Larry likes to live on the bleeding edge of what he can lift and pick up. Like his best ever trap bar deadlift, because that just works, for his biomechanics a little bit better, is a 490. Okay. His quest is 500. And he did that 490 after a heart attack a couple of years ago that he came back from. And so that's what he wants. And he likes 1 rep maxing kind of frequently. He's shorter. His lower back is just a concrete pillar. It just doesn't seem like it. Grip is the issue at that stage, right? And then there's another older client of mine, same age. And I mean, he's really risk averse. So sometimes it's just what he feels safe doing. And we probably don't even go over 200 pounds. Now, am I saying that heavier load in that range is more risky? Not necessarily, but knowing him, I keep his rep ranges a lot higher. I'm listening to how he feels. And I think he's like a little bit more hypervigilant to aches and strains and discomfort as he's doing it. So it's just talking to the client, but knowing how their mind works. And then can we find and figure out what are the things that they feel safest doing that lets them, produce force? Like a big mistake people make is, especially dealing with older adults, is getting away from explosive, powerful based stuff. That's a movement quality that declines faster than strength and muscle mass does. We probably need those qualities. So I'm not saying that you turn around and have that population learn Olympic lifting in their 70s, right? But it's, can you get them whipping medicine balls at a wall as hard as possible? Try to break the wall. Yeah. We've got sledgehammers and a tire. That is a money exercise for power and explosiveness for older populations. I just don't think someone's going to get hurt doing that. Having them pushing sleds, doing, do I have those people all out like sprinting alone? Probably not. But can I have them sprint with a sled with moderate load so that way they can't let them accelerate at their maximal speed, but they can try to push against that resistance pretty fast. So those are ways I like to train those populations. I hope I've answered the question.
Well, that kind of plays into an aspect of the post-injury that kind of gets left out. And what I'll call that is intention factors, to where if take the pec tear person, and they're going to play from gym pop all the way up through in different contexts. So the person that's coming back from the pec tear, they can become timid. Right. So instead of pressing with maximum force, they're going to be a little more timid, then bam, that hurts because it's a different tempo. They're thinking about it all the time. So instead of using their maximal force, they're using kind of like sub-maximal force, and then boom, there comes the injury. And there's an inherent fear of the injury. For a top lifter, it's going to take time to be able to get over that for catastrophic injuries, it may be a year or even more than that to where the lifter will say, you know what, that's the first time I didn't even really think about it. Right. So that would be on that high end is, you know, and it deals with that explosive context that you're talking about, being able to not have the fear and be able to actually explode with maximum intent and not be thinking, oh, fuck, oh, fuck, oh, fuck, or it's there. Or maybe you feel just a little bit, but it's not even what it is. It could just fucking be placebo for that matter. But that plays into it. Now, when you downscale that, that could be the person, a gen pop that's coming back from a back injury, right? And the problem with physios in the US, I don't know how it works in other countries, is the insurance is only going to pay for so many sessions, right? So there's a gap there. And it would be called like the post-rehab gap or whatever it is. Then there's the other side that most people don't go to all the sessions to begin with, you know, so trainers get stuck with, we need to get range of motion back first, you know, all those type of things that play into there. But how often have you heard, well, I can't squat because I have this back problem, right? Maybe, you know, but maybe the squat's going to help the back problem. Right. So there with each one of these major injuries, yes, you may lose certain things out of your arsenal forever. I mean, that's a possibility. But on the gen pop level, they're losing more exercises than they think they need to lose. You know, I got a knee problem. I can't leg press. I can't squat. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't do that. You know, so the trainer or the coach kind of has to reintroduce these in there because that could be the reason why they're going to have another fucking knee problem is because they're not strengthening those movement patterns.
Absolutely.
You know, and so those, I don't know what else to call that except just intention, you know, the intention of that. And certain, if it's a prosthetic or something like that, there may be certain things you just can't do anymore. But that's really kind of a short list compared to the things that you can. But the list that the actual athlete or the person will take from that streamlined prosthetics, I'm told not to run, not to jump, you know, don't do plyo, shit like that. Okay. Sure. Okay. I won't do those because I don't like them anyhow. But I know a lot of people that will extend that all the way out through. Like, okay, I can't do X, Y, Z, and all those other things in there. So those lists become very expansive.
Let's look at the example of like a knee replacement or a hip replacement. And I mean, is that the only piece of structure? So if someone's giving the advice, hey, don't do all these things with this hip replacement, well, that to me is fucking stupid, because what's going to help that hip last longer? Strong muscles around it, right?
Yeah.
So strong glutes, strong lower back, strong quads, strong hamstrings, strong adductors. So yeah, we may have to, anytime you're dealing with an injury, figure out what that person psychologically tolerates and they're comfortable with getting back. And if you can build confidence within that, then you can regress back to something that they feel maybe a little less safe with. Regress the load, regress the volume, get them to feel safe, get them to tolerate that. And getting back to the range of motion, the best way to get back those ranges of motion is to theoretically use lighter loads and control into that range of motion. Sometimes I love just adding stability to things. I use the example of my knee, right? And yeah, like for whatever reason, my knee just doesn't like super love like a free squat, even a bodyweight squat. But if I have the stability of being encased in a pendulum squat machine, I like to call external reference, right? If you think about, right, how much external reference do you have when you're squatting? What's touching, what's grounded to something else? I think Pat Davidson likes the phrase external ground. The surface area of your 2 feet and the fact that the 2 feet balance each other, right? What do you got in a leg press? Or let's say the pendulum squat. Okay, shoulders, entire back is grounded, shoulders are anchored, and you've got the handle you're holding on to, plus the surface area where your feet is. And just having that extra stability, my knee feels really good through a deep range of motion. So why can't I do that with squats? I gradually and progressively try to work on, you know, loading through that bodyweight squat I fuck around with all the time. But guess what? I can load up pendulum squat, no problem, and actually get progressive training on my quads and everything else I'm training. So I found the answer. So for each client, if there's something that they're not feeling super with, and in the case of like, say, a competitive powerlifter with a pec tear, okay, cool, we got to get them back to a barbell if they want to compete for real. But maybe the answer short term is to expose them to a progressive but a lot more load. And maybe it's a hammer strength, you know, chest press machine. And then they, with that extra stability, they all of a sudden go, wait a second, I feel okay. And as they progressively strengthen that tissue will get stronger, more resilient, and they should theoretically build it back, as long as there's not some sort of structural thing. Pec tears are kind of rough because, you tear one of those and I don't know if it's ever quite the same, but lots of powerlifters have also come back from pec tears and have been competitive.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago about working with those older clients who are performing very well, and the need to work on things like explosive strength because those are lost. They start to decrement earlier in life. So for Gen Pop, do you think the best way to reduce injuries in the global longevity sense is actually to look at your training as, what are the things that I lose first and then progressively lose as I age, and work on, keep those in earlier? So
Absolutely.
If explosive strength is lost first, that's probably the thing that people should have in their training in their 20s and 30s so they can keep it in there.
Absolutely. I mean, everything starts early. So what do we lose as we get older? We lose muscle mass, right? We lose strength, and those things, like we said, tend to run concurrent. We lose power and explosiveness faster, but also I think there was a statistic recently was floating around in our world, and 90+% of people after the age of 30, I can't remember the exact numbers, never sprint again. Mm-hmm. So what happens to the person who goes out and hasn't played tennis or softball in 10 years, and all of a sudden that guy gets competitive and goes all out at a weekend tournament and then is hurt, right? Rips a hamstring or something like that. Well, what happened? Force exceeded tissue tolerance because you hadn't worked on those movement qualities in a really long time, and you just went and did too much too fast. So in the case of, the older person who suffers a fall, and let's say they haven't maintained the muscle mass, maybe they haven't maintained the strength, maybe they haven't maintained the bone mineral density and the balance. And so really going around every day, you can look at it through this lens, everyday life all of a sudden becomes force exceeds tissue tolerance in a way. So you just fail to maintain your ability to absorb force and the tissue and your tissue tolerance, which is just the strength and the muscle mass of that tissue and the bone mineral density. So that's kind of like a metaphor for life, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And then let's take it even further again with fall injuries. Remember when we were young and get down to the ground, crawling around, no big deal, right? I remember climbing through snow tunnels when I was a kid in northern Newfoundland that we would dig. And nowadays, you get down on your knees, you're like, oh, that feels weird. So it's an argument to say, well, why don't we actually spend a bit more time on the ground, getting up and down from the ground? That's actually a valuable skill, especially for clients in their 70s and upwards. So I try to incorporate some of that stuff so that way people have those abilities and we take that shit for granted. So I think it's just exposing ourselves to, and it's not like trying to replicate the everyday in our general training. I still think that general strength and preparedness through a lot of basic shit is still the answer. But can we have that basic shit? Maybe it's a bear crawl for an older adult. And if they struggle with it, that's all the more reason that maybe they should be doing that and have the ability to get up and down. I mean, how many people, we don't really hear this stuff because we don't know, but how many people die because they suffered a fall, they lived alone, and the fall didn't kill them, but they're not near a phone. They can't get up. They physically aren't strong enough to get up after that fall. And this is horrific, but there are instances where people have survived for days. No one found them, and then they died. Not necessarily because of the fall specifically, but because they just did not have the ability to roll over, get themselves up and moving, and find a phone and call 911.
That's an interesting thing because it just reminded me of when I was training the Gen Pop people, I would always have them do crunches, which were kind of fucking worthless, and planks.
Yeah.
But that wasn't why I was having them do it. I'd have them stand up between sets. And, other trainers would be like, why? Because they just have them lay down there and stay down there. The whole thing was to get down and then to get back up because it was so hard for them to do.
And is this optimized training for planks? Fuck no, it's not. But it's so smart and practical for these other reasons.
Exactly. So it wasn't for those reasons at all. It was because over a period of time, you could see, oh shit, now they can get down and get up a lot easier than they were before because it's 6 sets or whatever it was at the end of every training session where, other trainers would just have them lay down and just roll over and do the set, lay down, roll over. And I guess that's fine because they can roll over, but still it was the getting up and back down.
The question I guess I then have is strength training and hypertrophy, all that type of thing has historically always been marketed as like a young man's game, right? When we could probably all sit here and make the argument that the older you get, the more benefit you probably have personally. Because, if you're 20 and you fall over, chances are you can get to your phone or whatever it might be. So How do we go about kind of, as an industry, maybe rebranding strength training, lifting weights, etc., to get this message across that, sure, okay, it's something that's easier to do in your 20s or whatever, but it actually probably has the biggest potential benefits for those who are aging and naturally kind of losing these facets of their physical abilities.
As I think there's a lot of dimension to it. Is one of the reasons why, again, I'll put up a lot of video of my client Larry, and I've got to get back to doing a bit more of it, but he'll do heavy farmer's carries, heavy trap bar deadlifts. He'll squat to the range of motion he has, landmine pressing. Now, there's a fine line there too, because some people will see that because Larry's a freak and go, well, I don't want to like lift heavy like that. But it's also really cool if you see how strong and capable someone like that is. And then it's targeting your media and your messaging, let's say for the coaches, especially the ones who are trying to either stay top of mind to their network or build a larger audience at a brand. I mean, there's an incredible audience, and older adults do use social media, right? Like they use Facebook. Funny enough, they are on Instagram and even probably TikTok. You could be like, oh, TikTok's stupid. It's like, okay, you can take that attitude, or you can actually serve the niche that's out there who's on these platforms and showcase your older adults lifting. Or I'll give a good example. So I don't know who here is familiar with a woman named Susan Niebergall. Susan is Jordan Syatt's partner in their Inner Circle program. I just had her on my podcast. Susan's 65, just had a hip replacement surgery. But Susan is ripped and she can do weighted chin-ups, okay? But Susan and I talk about this. Like there's almost no older women in the fitness industry, like Train with Joan, I think. But outside of that, you just don't almost see any of this stuff. So how do we get more people? And like, give it 20 years, they're going to have a huge cohort that will age into that.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's not that many people in that space serving, coming from that place. But at least if you're showcasing your clients, but talking about the stuff, talking about fall injury prevention, because people are scared of that. And it's not that I want to perpetuate fear. I actually think that's a terrible idea, but it's dealing with the reality of stuff that people don't necessarily talk about that much, which is, and again, I'm not sure about the statistics off the top of my head, but I think it's something like 15 to 30% of adults over the age of 60, someone will probably correct me on these exact numbers, who suffer a fall injury either die immediately from the fall or die within the next year. And I alluded to this earlier. If you take one of the most important things about health, quality of life as you get older, there's metabolic health and like your nutrition and your level of adiposity and all this stuff. But there's a big determinant, like the blue zone stuff. They have rich social lives. So what happens to someone who's active and actually has a rich social life and they suffer a broken pelvis or femur? You've taken away their ability to get out into the world. They probably can't drive. They're probably now far more sedentary. So what does sedentary inactivity do to people? Increases the risk of mental health declining. It worsens metabolic health. And I mean, how many people have a story about an elderly relative or someone they knew that had a rich, vibrant life, suffered an injury of that nature, and then very quickly dementia set in very rapidly because they lost a lot of the stimulus, the physical and life stimulus. They're robbed of it. So you start talking about those things. And as people get older, they realize, well, I don't want that. I don't want to have the risk. Like my client, Larry, he's very fatalistic. He's a widower. And if like he gets taken out in one shot, he's like, it's all good. I won't care. But he doesn't want to have something like a stroke where he lives in a very debilitated state. So he's actually really motivated to try to have the best quality of life he possibly can. And you get people understanding these things. And I don't like scaring people into being active, but at least if they get to think about the reality of these things as they get older, and we show them a pathway and go, if we focus on having you do some fun, power-based stuff, honestly, it's fun to whip medicine balls at a wall to try to break the wall. It is fun to swing sledgehammers, okay? And okay, maybe it's flipping tires if that's a suitable stimulus for that person. It doesn't all have to be, again, like I said, Olympic lifting stuff that I think it's great for the right person, but it might also be intimidating for someone. Give them something accessible that they think is fun.
When we had Bob Rakowski on here, I can't remember the terminology that he quoted, but it was, a saying or term to essentially how the quality of life in other parts of the world stays very high for very long, and then death comes quickly.
Yes.
Whereas in our society, it's more of this horrible, slow decline, wait for death. And do you think that just the general activity and the perception that it's okay and should just be expected that physical capacity just dials down to a great degree as you age, that kind of acceptance is what's driving that to a large degree?
I think it's a great way to look at it. Peter Attia talks about the same thing on, I think, his book Outlive. And yeah, the ideal is much, much greater health span, and then the rapid decline, which sounds bad, but it's better than the slow progressive one. And I think people take that argument too far, because then they get negative about, the drugs, the pharmaceutical side of stuff that's propping people up. And I think there's probably way too many people who are over reliant upon that, as opposed to doing the things that work, like resistance training and, being mindful of your nutrition. But it's often presented as a false dichotomy, as if the pharmaceutical side's evil. I'm not pro pharma or anything like that, but I'm also like, I don't go the other way. It's like, okay, it's like the Ozempic debate. There's this elitist mindset. It's like, oh, that's somehow cheating. It's like, well, okay, how does that make sense? Because you're the kind of people who like get on with and shame people for, being overweight or not metabolically healthy. But then all of a sudden we have this, and yes, okay, you can make the argument of side effects and knowing what's, Dr. Mike Isertel's wife, Dr. Crystal Guevara, is incredible for this sort of stuff. She's both a physician who prescribes Ozempic and herself been a patient of it. And she's very honest about like the potential stuff that can happen, but how much it's like changed her life for the better. And then we get these coaches who are like shaming people for using that. And yeah, we know we got possibly the celebrities who aren't talking about using it, and they're not lifting and they're losing muscle mass. Like as I understand it, and this is coming from Crystal, like Ozempic doesn't cause loss of muscle mass. It's the absence of resistance training. And if someone lost the weight by aggressively dieting and wasn't resistance training, then the amount of muscle mass you would lose would be the same. And therefore it is the no resistance training and reduction in calories. That's what caused the loss of muscle mass, not the Ozempic. Ozempic is just a very efficient way of getting people to eat less calories.
In that context, the word like cheating is often used. And my retort to that is like, cheating by what rule set? Like, are we competing in the weight loss Olympics here? And like, there's some kind of rule set that everyone has to do it the same way. Like, by the same token, I could say, well, you know what? If I'm some paleo person, well, you using whey protein powder is cheating. You should be, and then someone more extreme might be like, buying your supermarket-based chicken is cheating. You need to go out and kill it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just people's weird perceptions. But in those contexts, it's like, oh, we want you to lose weight, but not that way. That's not cool.
At what point does it end? Because like, well, if you're really talking Paleolithic shit, well, you should be out like with a flint and steel starting your own fires. Like, where does it end? I think it comes with this lens of status. And I literally posted this post I use sometimes. It was like a Dean Somerset quote, which is a twist on the old Arnold quote about like, muscle and your body is the ultimate status symbol. And I think that can be true. But when people take that sentiment too far and then they think that, well, I am uniquely virtuous because I am in shape and everybody else is lesser than, and then all of a sudden they're fearful that this drug like Ozempic is coming along, and all of a sudden everybody's going to be walking around look like you. Ozempic doesn't work that way. It still requires the resistance training. It still requires like smart like hypertrophy training to put on that kind of muscle. And so why are you gatekeeping leanness when you're telling everybody that they need to be this way? But then, and again, it's gatekeeping because the people who have done it up to this point generally have done it for years of dedication to nutrition and training. Good, awesome, but it doesn't make you better than anybody else because you've done that. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think everybody should aspire to it. But if we're creating access, because we know that the broader population as a whole is probably not going to live the kind of lifestyle the people listening, the people, sitting at this table are doing. But what are we all doing? We're trying to create access. This whole discussion has been about access for the older adults who aren't active enough. And if you serve that population through good media, whether it's long form writing, whether it's being savvy with social media, and you can get more people to go, I like that person's message. They make the gym sound like a fun, accessible place versus a scary place. Then we get more people to experience better mental health, better metabolic health, get them on the pathway. And
I think this answer is way more simple than people make it out to be. And there's two underserved markets, right? So there's the older population, which we can argue and just say, you know, Gen X and millennials are just going to age in and all that.
Yep.
But then there's a younger demographic, which is way worse than all the other generations. I mean, the generations coming up now are way worse.
Yep.
You know, from obesity, from metabolic health, from all that, just way worse.
their anxiety levels, mental
Yes.
health is worse than ever.
When I look at the trainers, coaches, personal trainers that are trying to serve this fitness market, they market to people who are essentially kind of already in shape.
Yeah.
Look at all their social media stuff. They're not marketing to the older people and they're not marketing to the younger people, but they'll sit back and they'll bitch about all the fads and all the trends and all the weight loss products and all the bullshit that do market to those groups, but yet themselves won't fucking market to those groups. So shut the fuck up, you know, unless you're going to market to those groups. It's simply just positioning and marketing. But, you know, if it's status or whatever it is, the online coach segment that wants to serve those markets, well, then fucking serve those markets. You know, go on Blue's Clues as a fucking commercial. I don't know. You know, I don't know how you get in front of those markets. But they're giant markets, you know, that used to be served through, and probably still do, from chain health clubs and shit like that. But that market's there. So it's a positioning thing. But nobody wants to put the average looking person or the person that's just starting training on their Instagram, Facebook, or whatever it is, because they're not showing. They can train for a year and not really look any different, but their health status is going to be radically different. But they don't want to put them up. What they're going to put up are the people that look like they actually train and say, look at that, which is a fucking deterrent to the people that we need to get to do that, because they're going to say, I can't achieve that. I'm already way out of fucking shape. I can't do that.
Yeah. I mean, to go back to like some of your biggest wins, you kind of mentioned like, you know, sure, the big squats or putting on 30 pounds of muscle is cool, but I don't know about, I talk about this one quite a lot, where one of the coolest moments I've had as a coach is the oldest person on our powerlifting team back home was 72 at the time when she broke her all-time world record deadlift, which, and it's not about the world record deadlift when you hear the rest, because it was done about a year after she lost her husband. And she came up to Naomi and I after pulling that deadlift, which, by the way, more people probably scream for that 105 kilo deadlift or whatever, the guy who squatted $1,000 in the morning. That is what happens at powerlifting meets, right? And she came up to us and said, I thought I would never be happy again. After like that, as a coach, for me at least, how I perceive the fitness industry, that's probably the biggest win Naomi and I will ever get, or at least ties, right? And that's the type of differences we can make to those markets that you're talking about there, whether it's the younger market who, you know, struggling with mental health on a bigger scale than other, or the older populations who are genuinely trying to live longer and a higher risk of death because they're not doing these things. We can make that type of difference to them. And I think maybe there needs to be some kind of shift, like you're saying, where we celebrate that more, as opposed to the aesthetic ideals or the impressive feats of strength. They will always be there, and they're always going to be impressive. But for people like you and I, who are just working with people, not muscle building machines, I don't know about you, but I will remember that moment forever, not a PR, for example.
I'll give you another example of how this plays out in our industry with the status seeking behavior. So I'm about to fly into an event where I'm speaking in front of a bunch of coaches. And because I'm not a business mentor in the traditional sense, and I don't sell anything for there, even being on this podcast, right? There's a lot of, I think, you know, enthusiasts, a lot of coaches, what have you. I don't think someone's going to hear this and go, oh my God, I want him to be my trainer. I mean, if someone does, fucking massive bonus. But that's not how I go about this stuff. I genuinely hope that people take something really helpful here. I hope it enhances your career. I hope it reinforces and tells you that you're already doing a lot of really smart shit that you probably haven't been validated for. I really hope that's a big takeaway. But, you know, I host a podcast. You guys have this podcast. How many people probably message you and go, hey, you know, I'd love to come on your podcast, right? I get it all the time. I host an event the last couple of years, and I'll get messages be like, hey, are you looking for speakers? And I'm like, motherfucker, you'd benefit more by being in the audience. And I think a lot of coaches, I mean, this stuff can be very rewarding. Sitting here, this is an honor to me. great, right? I hope it helps a lot of people. But this isn't going to turn into 15,000 followers. It's not going to turn around and like change my career in one singular blow. It's the adding up of years of relationship stuff and being of service to other people. And if you think, well, if I get on the podcast or if I get on the stage at an event, then it's somehow going to make you. I'm not going to get any clients off of this appearance I'm going into. I'll have a lot of professional connections. I get to spend, like, it's a trip to go spend time with kindred spirits and talk about this kind of shit. That is fulfilling, right? That maybe keeps us in the game. Maybe it's rewarding. But instead of worrying about getting on the stage in front of other trainers who aren't going to buy from you anyway, go back to what you were saying earlier. Go local. Go volunteer at a high school. Develop relationships that way. Get within a 3 to 5 mile radius of where you're already coaching people. Stop competing first in a noisy social media and be of service and develop relationships locally. Get into corporate wellness, learning the skill of public speaking. Great. Awesome idea. Get in front of local companies. Number one, that actually starts to pay pretty well if you lean into it. And two, you get in front of people who actually might hire you. So you'll develop, fewer, but far better quality potential relationships that could turn into clients. And it's the same thing for getting on the podcast. Like whatever I'm on something like this, again, it's how could I be of service to the people who are kind enough to invite me here, as opposed to thinking, ooh, this is going to make me. And maybe if you're the coach who wants to get more of these opportunities, again, can you create them for yourself? What if you start your own podcast, you serve the audience you already have and platform other great people in the industry, develop relationships that way, and then that may turn around and get you invitations. I've been traveling to fitness conferences and supporting them for years before people started inviting me to speak at them. I tried to turn my first invitation down. My friend is like, no, I want you. I'm like, well, why don't you go back and, see if Lee Boyce is interesting or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, and he's like, no, I want you. I'm like, okay, cool. And so I hustled. I built the skill set really quickly. I messaged my buddy, Luca Hocevar. I know you guys got planned. And I'm like, Luca, what books you got on public speaking, right? And so dug into that. And I've leaned hard into those skills. But again, I approach it as like, how can I be of service and support my friends here? And I think if you, the listener, catch yourself thinking, well, if I get on these podcasts, if I get on these stages and you are craving the chasing of status, wrong lens to look at this career through. Look at it from a lens of how can I be of service to the people in front of me already? How can I create great messaging and media? T Nation was great for this for years. Dave, I mean, how many people... And Tom, how many people have read your articles for years on those? And read the articles on elitefts, and then you built credibility and respect in the eyes of those people, and then they turn around later on, and either you interacted with them in some professional level, or they hired you guys as coaches. It's a slow burn, right? And we talked off air that while social media and I think video-based media right now is all the rage, I still think there's a lot of quality and credibility in going back and for everybody listening, I can't suggest enough, dig into elitefts and your library of resources, your articles. Maybe start with mine. You're listening, you're coming from my media, read my article that Tom mentioned earlier, and it's about what creates injury risk and what factors can we manage in it, right? I'll send it to you personally if you message me. But go down that rabbit hole. That will help you become a better coach. But if you turn around and take what you learn and then you get savvy with video-based media and you're competing with the Muppets that are, I'll use an example, people know it, like, I didn't know why this is still a thing. And that particular individual or people like them who are peddling literal rubbish for clicks and they're drowning you out and you're frustrated because they're drowning you out. Well, you also have to get better at that game if that's the pool you want to compete in. But I still think that going local and serving your existing audience is still a smarter foundation.
So for the coaches out there that are maybe feeling the pull towards that, should we say, that wrong lens that you mentioned there, what barometers should they be using to measure their impact in this industry? Because, a lot of them are going to be pulled in that direction because they feel like they're not making an impact. Very few, I would say, coach, and maybe you can correct me, really get into this because they're super money driven. We all want money to a degree, but they're not super fun. But they do want to make an impact. And maybe the reason they feel they're not making an impact is because they're defining that as the wrong thing. Yeah. So what would you say to kind of a budding coach who maybe feels like they're being drawn towards that? What should they be focusing on?
Recognize that oftentimes the metric becomes, if you set the wrong metrics, the behavior becomes what drives that metric, and that can become really maladaptive, right? You measure what matters. So if your social media following as an explicit vanity metric becomes your guiding star, you've got a problem there. I think if you do a really great job of the answer to your question is serving the person in front of you. If you do a great job of serving that person in front of you, like if you treat every client as the only client you have and you need to get more, and you just pour your soul into that person, make sure they have a great experience, they're more likely to continue to train with you, which a client retained is a client earned. They're probably far more likely to refer business to you. That was the foundation of my clientele for years before social media was even a factor, right? And it's not looking at every person you interact as a dollar sign or a potential client. It's to be a real human and just genuine and interested in other people. But if those people also recognize what you do, they're far more likely to see you as their go-to authority, especially if you actually connect with them via social media. Because for all the shit we talk negatively about social media, there's a lot of positives. Dave, you said this earlier, where it is a way to deepen relationships. I mean, I met you guys at Swiss not too long ago. I've been following you media, known you guys for a long time, but we finally met, right? But having that connection via social media then allowed a little bit more depth. And Tom, you turned around pretty quickly and invited me on here. Even there, you'd invited me to write something for Elite FTS. I'm writing on that plane. I'm not fucking that up. I put together something really good. And I think social media can be a great way to maintain connections and sometimes build them in between opportunities like this, the face-to-face stuff. And that's why I also say get on the plane and go and attend an event and sit in the seats and connect with the people who are just like you, because you're going to see what they're doing. You're going to be inspired. You're going to learn a lot of shit about how people do their businesses. It'll break you out of a lot of the rigid thinking of coming out of the commercial gym session model, which I still think is great and everybody should have that experience. But you'll learn how different people are operating in their businesses and you'll be inspired and have a fire lit under you. I know I'm side questing all over the place here. I'll let you kind of draw me back in.
That importance of what is your metric of success, I think, or your standard of success, I think is really important. There's a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which is a really cool book. But in there he talks about how and you might remember his name because I don't, the first drummer of Metallica got kicked out and then apparently spent his whole life being pretty miserable, even though he went on to form Megadeth, who were probably the second most successful metal band ever. But because his idea of success was Metallica, he was forever miserable.
Dave Mustaine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So if your measure of success is 1 million followers, you're probably going to spend your life miserable, right? So my question off of that is, if I'm a coach who's trying to break into that space with all those attention seekers, shall we say, if I'm creating my brand, how important is it to you, do you think, that brand, rather than being business savvy, represents what that person finds fulfilling in the career that they're going into? As it represents why they got into coaching, as opposed to necessarily being the most business savvy model to use.
I mean, I think people can tell who's doing it for clicks and status, and I think people who can tell who's relatable. If you share your experience, and maybe you as a coach, maybe you're not the most ripped or the strongest coach. I'm sitting here in Elite FTS. I mean, I'm a big human, and I walk into most gyms and my lifts or whatever. They're in any commercial gym, they're impressive lifts. I would be a very mediocre power lifter in an environment like this. Not my goal, not my thing. But I think if you draw from the clients you work with who are everyday people, which are going to be more compelling stories and relatable to other people, or if you yourself as a coach have a great journey and you share that, and okay, maybe some person on social media turns around, I've got a client, she's a coach, she's lost a bunch of weight, and she doesn't look like a bikini competitor. She doesn't really care about that. She's a mom of 2 kids, and she's both nervous about posting on social media, but she's actually pretty fearless. She just does it anyway. And every once in a while, some shitbag will come on there and body shame her or say something. Well, guess what? That's not the type of client she wants anyway. But far more often, she gets people who you're really relatable, right? I've seen your journey. I've seen your transformation. You're like me. You're not intimidating. And that person's not going to go for the men's physique model type online coach anyway. So she presents herself in an authentic way, and she's getting real people who need the help coming to her doorstep, and she's doing great. So I think a lot of people are afraid of the worst element of social media. My social media, 99.9% of the interactions are really positive. Every once in a while, someone is says something nasty. There's a comment, I comment on something, everybody is like agreeing with me, and then someone makes a disparaging remark, based on a profile photo. I laugh. I deliberately for years have actually used a profile photo that has made me look smaller and more innocuous physically. That's been on purpose, right? Like I'm 250 pounds at 6'2". I'm not a small human being, but I used a photo that made me look more walk through general population because I was interested in showing up less for the physique side of stuff and more accessible with the messaging to resonate with general people. And then every once in a while someone meets you in person, like, what the fuck? Okay, cool. That's great. That feels nice. But I would far more rather show up in the world and be relatable and accessible than to make sure that and again, I think there's a lot of credibility in having the physique and the strength performance. I think that stuff's amazing. But I actually deliberately don't put that first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you're in touch with quite a lot of successful coaches from quite a wide background. So for those who are successful, and here I'm not defining success by monetary terms as such, but people who are fulfilled, but also maybe financially sustainable, what common trends do you see in how they're branding themselves, how they're going about their business that you think would be good ideas for other coaches?
I think if you just look at the directionality, I think most of the respected authorities that we see in this industry have authority because they have successful businesses and successful educational platforms. You guys are a great example of both. And people follow because you've also then translated all of that experience and that credibility into being good about, the short form media. Certainly you've had a lot of long form media over the years. We refer to articles a bunch. And I think that's generally true of most of the credible authorities, whether it's a Christian Thibodeau or a Dr. Mike Isertel. And then you can get really savvy, like the way that RP goes about their YouTube. They've got over 3 million subscribers. Cool. They know that game. They've been really smart about it. But that's off the back of years of high quality coaching resources, high quality educational materials. Anybody who's come out of the T-Nation world, who's a lot like you guys who are longtime T-Nation contributors, there's years of good information and ideas that each individually probably weren't viral, but added up to being of service to the reader. So a coach like me who came up reading that stuff and inspired me to follow the same path. And I think if you don't chase the vanity, if you are of service mindset to the client in front of you, show their wins, and then you figure out ways that how can I take the lessons and experience that I have and share it in short and long form media, build those skills, put it out in the world, get better at those skills, and then it'll attract the right audience without, and it's sharing, posting, showing up, writing, creating without having an emotional reaction to the individual outcome of each post, each video, each article, but just continuously showing up. You alluded to this earlier. It's the process and the behavior as a goal, not the outcome or the metric as the goal. And if you get really tied to those metrics, you'll get defeated and frustrated. If you fall in love with the process, whether it's coaching the client in that session, the person in front of you is everything in that moment, or if it's writing the article or it's the podcast episode and you just enjoy the journey and you accumulate enough of the stuff, you will get way better at it and it will build audience over time.
Well, I think it would help coaches to understand the monetary reality of the whole industry across the board too, where, there's a top 1%, that makes a lot of money, right? But on average, most of the coaches that I know make enough to earn a living, right? And then that's not even on average, right? I would say that's above average. That would probably be top tier, right?
And the churn.
And then
churn is high.
Underneath that, you got people that they make enough to be able to earn an extra income. So I think people are going in thinking, I'm striving to be that top 1%. You need to strive to be able to have it be a good part-time income. And then hopefully, with enough work, a lot of work, have it be enough to earn, basically be your living, right? Because for most coaches out there, it is not enough to be their living, right? And that gets underrepresented, when you're looking at the fake world of social media, because it's like, well, I'm not doing well. I'm not helping people. It's I'm not successful because I'm only generating this much revenue. The fact of the matter is, if you actually knew, like and I know for a lot of these people, I know how much they make. You'd be fucking shocked at what they make compared to what they perceive to make. There's a giant discrepancy between that, outside of that top 1%, right? So I think once they understand that, then it's easier for them to get more rooted in what the values that they have are and building the values into the brand that they want to be able to put out, because they're not chasing this false dichotomy or this false reality, which I'm not saying it can't happen, right? 'Cause who knows? But there's a lot of luck and there's a lot of other shit that plays into that to get in that top 1%. But if you go into any profession, you kind of know what that profession makes. You can Google it, GPT it, whatever it is. You kind of know what the average salary is going to be of what that's going to be. And that average salary is probably on a pretty high skill level, a higher skill level than what most people have that will look that up. Because they'll look it up and say, well, fuck, I should be making that. Like, you understand that somebody that's been doing it for 10 years is a fucking professional. And that's the average. So
let's dive into a starting point for, newer coaches too. And I think a lot of coaches now are in a rush to get off the commercial gym floor. And this is sort of a Hormozy sentiment, but you're paying a price to learn the skills and gain the experience. And that price is in earning potential. But I think one of the best things you can do is to, as rapidly as possible, accumulate experience, which means coaching more clients. How do you get access to more clients? Most people won't start out independently having access to that many people. So where do you go? You go work in that space, you gain the experience, you find an environment that actually can help you, will teach you skills like sales. A lot of coaches have this weird relationship with sales. You need to learn to sell, but it's not used car sales, stereotypical shit. It's loving and believing in what you offer, meeting people where they're at, being accessible. And if you feel good about what you're delivering to people, this shit sells itself, right? But you still have to chill the fuck out and not talk yourself out of a sale or be scared to death of it. Here's a piece of language that I think I stole this from Luca, but this will help you with selling. Instead of the coach sitting there going, nervously, hey, do you want to buy from me? And then the person says some sort of hesitation, like, oh, no, it's okay, don't worry. No, it's like, let me remember the phrasing. I would love to work with you. I would love to have your business. Say that phrase. When someone is at that point, I look at them and go, I would love to train you. I would love to have your business. And it's a really safe way of asking for the client's business, and then shut up, right? And then let them say, all right, and then don't talk about it anymore. Get things signed, get a payment, and get them in right away and build off the excitement, and then just show up like the first half of this episode was.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfect. You mentioned a few times already writing articles, writing quality, the importance of long form content. We've also obviously spoken about how we have a generation now that probably need coaching perhaps more than ever, who are not, should we say, very in tune with long form content. So how do you see the current landscape of the fitness industry in terms of its longer form written word? And what should coaches, do you think, be striving to do to make their longer form content more approachable for perhaps those that need it most?
There's a lot of stuff here. So you implied a few things. One is attention span. Attention span is not shorter than, technically speaking, it's not shorter than it was, 20, 30 years ago. You were presented with far more stimulus, for sure. But, and this is a very cliche, not original sentiment, but people will still sit down and watch a 3-hour Rogan video, right? If people are interested in and they see value in what you present in long form, then they will plug into it. People still read Elite FTS articles, a 5 to 10 minute long article, which is not that long in the grand scheme of things. You just got to make sure it's good. Make sure that it is valuable knowledge, interesting, and then the skill of actually writing. So there's a lot here. And if someone thinks, well, why would I worry about learning the skill of writing because of video-based media? Well, most people who are really good at video-based media write it in script form, so you have to write there. If you are serious long-term about growing a career, it's important to probably have an email list and therefore be skilled at email writing, sales writing, copywriting is often what it's called. So that's an important skill. If you do want to stand out in the industry and write your own articles on your own website, I think that's a smart play. I started that before I got the invitation to write for T Nation. So if you work on and develop that skill, and even if it's on your own website, which actually is probably a smarter play now than trying to get in with, your T Nations and most of these other publications, because that industry has changed. A lot of it's SEO stuff. And David, you and I, when we first met, we were sort of lamenting the fact that we know that more and more stuff is going to be like purely chat GPT based. And I think you can use that as an idea generator and help you. Just don't make sure it's written from your own experience, your own authentic voice, please, for the love of God. That's how you'll stand out. People know. But the skill of writing is a really valuable one. Anybody wants to message me, I'll give you books on writing. Go read On Writing Well, William Zinsser. Go read Everybody Writes by Anne Handley. There's a handful of other really good ones, but those things will give you some basics. It'll make you a far better writer. But it's a really valuable skill for any type of media, any type of sales. So I think coaches should lean into it versus leaning away from it.
Well, the writing skills are also the skills of processing information and how to communicate the information. So even if it is all in a GPT, right, you still have to prompt it, right? So it's still all in there. And when you're talking about, say, I use GPT to help prepare for the podcast, right? So it's a large language model. So when I'm going to ask it about you, it's going to search the web about you, right? So it's going to go to your website. It's going to find about your about. It's going to scroll your blog. It's scrolling your content to know who you are. It can't say who you are if it has no anchor to know who the fuck you are, right? Now, if you're on podcasts and you're on all the other stuff, it's pulling transcriptions from that on who you are as well. So if it's somebody that's trying to position themselves in that market, and GPTs, I mean, they're here. They're just going to keep going, right? Where's the data for it to pull on who you are? It can't make up who you are. Well, it will. I mean, it will hallucinate and just make up who the fuck you are, or pull somebody else that's got the same name as what you are. Right. So there is still that aspect of it, even if it's getting 0 views, because these models have to be fed. So there's companies that just hire people only to feed the large language models and to check the large language models, because if it's a nurse, and there's nurses that are hired full time just to check the models to be able to correct when they fuck it up, to be able to make it better. There's that component too, right? So as things advance, they need to ask themselves that, right? Because it's going to pull what it already does. So it will pull your Instagram. It's going to pull all these different things. So wherever you're posting that content, that's where it's pulling from when people search who you are. And a large percentage of the people now are probably searching who you are on GPTs and not Google.
Because you've implied, people have this weird idea about what AI is. I'm not an expert on it, but it's a really, really advanced search function. That's one of the ways you can look at it, right? So, and to your point, if you show up and put out written form media or any kind of form media, you are feeding the world stuff that can be searched for people. Because there's another aspect to this. What are clients doing? Clients are doing search for personal trainers in geographic areas. They're searching for online people, but I've had a number of cases where someone local started searching for like what they saw as a high quality personal trainer. And based on the availability of my media, including things like articles, that was a differentiating factor. And funny enough, the size of my social media helped contribute, and some don't care. Cool, awesome, doesn't matter. But there's a lot of stuff out there in a variety of forms, and then they settle on, and then they read an article like something I've written for you guys, or some of the other stuff on injury stuff. That's a relevant thing. That's like a really, really important topic when it comes to the general population. They're concerned about it. They're concerned about aging and fall risk.
Oh, people are crazy if they don't think that you're going to be searched.
Yeah.
Right. And now if it's a chat GPT, I don't have to search Google and go through all these different websites to find your article. It's just going to pull that, right? And so when it pulls that through there, and if it's pulling from your socials, it's not going to show you how many likes the damn thing got or how many followers you have. It's just going to show you who you are and what your content is. And it's in there. So it's more feeding the algorithm on who you are.
And to something you said earlier, it's the quality of your ability to communicate, right? Which I think there's 3 ways, and really just 2 ways. There's written form and there's verbal form. And verbal shows up via YouTube video-based stuff, audio podcast-based stuff, and the in-person one-to-one based stuff, and public speaking. They're all offshoots of this. But then the only other way to do that is to write. And I think it's an important skill because you can't get away from even text-based communication with clients. I mean, again, I use a shit ton of voice messaging. It's like the simplest hack. It's so quick to pop it open, send a voice message, respond to a client's thing, but they get real interaction. You want to make your online coaching more like relationship based. Let them hear your voice. Let them see a quick video of you. It doesn't take long to answer a question with a 15-second video. In fact, I find it's easier and faster to send a quick video or voice than it is to write it out.
Mm-hmm. With the article writing and things like that, do you think there's some kind of negative feedback loop going on where coaches are perceiving that Gen X, whatever we want to call it, don't have the attention span for articles, so they put less effort into the articles?
Absolutely.
Therefore, the quality of the articles drops. Therefore, people read less articles because the quality of you see where I'm going. Do you think there's this negative feedback loop that needs to be addressed where people start re-emphasizing it to get it back in that positive direction?
Sure. Again, like a lot of people will self-select to algorithmic, fast, quick video-based media. We know that's for sure. But people also consume different information in different modes. Just look at the way people interact on different social media platforms as a cue. The person who's scrolling TikTok is consuming TikTok very differently than the way that they're interacting with the world on LinkedIn versus the way that they're interacting on Facebook. That's just a reality. We just forget that. So if you look at the entire interaction you have with everybody through the TikTokification of social media, well, you're missing opportunities. So, and if we've got this really noisy, bloody red ocean that is short form video based media, and again, you can do really well with that. I think there's value there. But if you think that's all there is, then you're missing the slightly bluer ocean now, the less saturated space, which is long form content creation, article-based stuff. And even if it's just hosting it on your website and making sure it's just really well written and of service to people, I still use the library of all the stuff I've ever written for you guys and for my own and whatever publications. I will frequently put up a social media post that'll have a short piece of it, and I'll say in the caption, DM me if, or comment, which creates engagement, which is positive. If you would like me to send you this article, I have this article on this. And of course, what are we doing? We're getting people to self-select who are interested. It's an invitation for people to interact with us who are interested in that thing. And then that can turn into an invitation I'll try to get people on my email list. I will ask them questions. The person is interested in you and your media all of a sudden. So there's a warm lead there. And I don't believe in going to the hard sell, but don't ignore that stuff. Send that person a voice message. It'll surprise them. And then you have a relationship. Invite them. Hey, if you ever have any questions, just send me a message. I'm happy to answer. And they show that you're responsive. And then those people may later on turn around and that's a person that goes into one of my programs or hires me as their one-on-one coach. Spread out, you mentioned luck earlier, just increase your surface area of luck. If you increase the number of interactions that you have in those spaces, whether it's in person, getting out in the world, you connect with someone at some sort of social thing or whatever, add them as a Facebook friend, get their Instagram, etc. And then you now all of a sudden put yourself top of mind to that person. And then later on, all of a sudden they realize, wait a second, this person's actually a pretty damn good coach. They're the local authority in this stuff. I need to hire a coach. And then they think of you. A lot of the stuff we've been talking about goes into one place. I just think that long form writing especially is a really good way to not just share lessons in media with other people, but also and you alluded to this, Dave, it's a great place to put your thoughts, your experience on paper, and it helps you learn, it helps you develop those skills, it helps you develop as a professional.
Sure, because as you're writing, you're going to find blind spots. And what do you have to do when you find the blind spot? You have to go figure out how to fill the blind spot, which means you have to go do research or whatever it is to fill those. So you just learned more, by doing that.
So in your experience then, does, in general, doing the longer form and the short form, if they're done well, add up to this kind of 1 + 1 = 3 scenario where you can kind of bleed between long form can lead to short-term interaction, short-term can lead to long-term, and overall by doing both, you actually get a greater response?
Absolutely. I mean, again, you think about the way that people engage with various forms of media. It starts with often superficial touch points. Someone sees a post and goes, all right, this is really cool. And then they look at your profile and they think, all right, well, why would I follow this person? They look at what else you got there. And if you have like my bio, I'm not a big fan. I know coaches do this stuff, but like I help single lawyer moms who are 39 to 41 years old who have 2.2 children, right? It's like, okay, I just don't think that says anything. My bio says all the shit that I've written for. And my guess is that people are going to, see one of my posts and then, well, what differentiates me from everybody else who does all these Twitter-based posts? Yeah, I wasn't the originator of it. I was in it way earlier. Now it's super ubiquitous. People don't fucking know that. They don't care. So how do I differentiate? Well, the bio is like, guess what? Elite FTS. I've written for Elite FTS. I've written for Men's Health. I've written for T Nation. The list goes on. That's hard to acquire. So that, for me, is a lot of authority. And it's one of the quickest ways I can differentiate and say, hey, I've got more shit to say here. And you don't get into those things. People who know, they know that you don't get into those things by accident. And then maybe they check out my podcast or any of the other sort of media-based stuff that I'm doing. And then they start doing the deep dive. And social media is just the biggest part of the funnel. And I hate the word funnel, the way it's used in click funnels, whatever. But it is part of this funnel that will get the right kind of people to go deeper into our media. I mean, do people usually start with, maybe they find a table talk via one of the guests that you guys have, but oftentimes maybe they find something about you guys via a social media post, or maybe it's an article, and then whatever, then they realize, what is it? These guys are like credible OG, like elite authorities in the fitness industry. Or maybe they find, your guys, the equipment first, but then they start diving in. All of a sudden they get into the podcast, but they stay for the quality and the depth of the podcast. And that's what really hooks them in. Or maybe it's the articles on Elite FTS. Okay.
In your experience then, for, let's say, coach who's at the point now where they want to start experimenting with that kind of longer form article writing, what are your general guidelines for putting out quality writing that is going to have these desired effects?
There's an easy starting point with this one. What are all the questions your clients keep asking you? It's so fucking easy. If you actually listen to people, and you're coaching a fair number of people, they're giving you more idea stuff than you could ever possibly create. I want to tell a story here. Okay. I've done this in presentations. And it'll make the point, like, it's not all been said before. So I want people listening to tell me, and you guys can do this in real time, name this story. Okay, so there's a cop that goes undercover into a cool subculture, struggles with learning the skill, gets better at the skill, and he's trying to figure out who's committing a series of high stakes robberies. Okay. And so he falls in with this crew and its charismatic leader. He gets romantically involved with a woman in the crew. There's a rival crew. He's sure these guys, he's smiling over there. He knows what this is. And the rival crew, they're bad guys. But it wasn't them. It's the original crew, original leader the whole time. There's a final high stakes robbery, goes bad, cop's identity is exposed. And then at the very end, he does chase down his friend, but he lets him go. What story did I just tell?
Is that Reservoir Dogs? I can't think of it.
What is it?
Point blank.
Oh, God damn it.
Right. It's Point Blank, but it's also The Fast and the Furious 1, right?
Yeah.
They're the same fucking movie, all of the same plot points, all of the same character archetypes, okay? Yeah. Now, for younger listeners, they're like, what are these? Go back and watch these movies. They're really good. Okay? It's like young Keanu Reeves, right? It's like the people who, know Keanu from The Matrix or from John Wick. Epic. Okay, cool. Me and Keanu go back as far as like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures in Point Break. But the point is someone, and there's debate whether or not, I mean, I was of the impression that the producers of the Fast and Furious officially got the rights to script and adapt it. I'm actually not sure that's true, but it's the same fucking story. It's like Harry Potter is literally Star Wars rewritten with wizards. It is, okay? And then even Star Wars is wizards. It's just Sith, Jedi, wizard, right? It's like this. And I know I'm on a tangent here, but this really makes the point. There's like this orphan kid with magical powers who's a chosen one, who there's this evil dark overlord that something terrible is going to happen if the kid doesn't rise to the challenge. It's the hero's journey, right? There's a lot of storytelling stuff in here, but proven formulas work. And you think it's all been said before. You think just because Dave Tate wrote an article on something 20 years ago for T Nation that someone's necessarily searching for that particular thing. You can make a social media post about that same concept. You can write an article. So now going back to what I was going to say is your clients ask you a ton of questions. Write a frequently asked questions library for your website, or do a frequently asked questions library on video for your YouTube. And if you get better at that skill of storytelling and writing, learn those skills deliberately and proactively, then your media content's going to get better. But you're creating this library of resources that you can share with a client. I can't count the number of times when a client, recently, 2 friends of mine, one tore his bicep, one tore her ACL. What did I do? I immediately saw this on their social media, and I grabbed my article on cross-education training with injured limb, and I sent it to them with a voice message, being like, hey, I think this might help you. They're both like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's a resource that's evergreen. The injury article I wrote for you guys, I've been doing that with people, and I will continue into the future to drive traffic to you guys, but to have a resource that is timeless, that will help people in that context. And that doesn't start if you don't start taking all this knowledge, this wisdom, this experience. It doesn't matter who's created a social media post in 2017 about it or wrote an article 10 years ago. You write your voice, your style. Don't plagiarize shit. Don't steal shit. And be of service to your audience, because again, your audience is probably not following most of the authorities you follow. And so there's no reason to play small because you think it's already all been done. And to go back to the Fast and Furious analogy, they made 10 films. There's another one coming out, and I will watch them to the, I go every premiere. I will watch them. Like, I want like 85-year-old Vin Diesel in a motor scooter. I literally want that. Okay. Like, give me all the Fast and Furious in the world. There's a spin-off, Hobbs and Shaw. I did the Fast and Furious ride at Universal Studios in 2022. The franchise is worth somewhere north of $6 or $7 billion because someone thought, hey, that idea is a really good one. They just remade Point Break. What if the guy said, well, I can't do that, right? I would never have gotten my Fast and Furious movies, and that would have sucked, right?
So what you're also saying there is as well, like the writing of the articles, whatever it might be, okay, sure, it's educational, maybe it's a lead magnet or whatever, but what you're saying is also potentially in the long term, it can save you time. You've got this readily available resource that you can say, hey, I'm going to run into another client that has this problem. Here's this demo video I did on whatever, or here's this article I wrote on it. And over the course of your career, you actually probably thank your previous self for doing that.
Absolutely. I mean, build a video library, right? I hired a videographer to film a basic but thorough library of all the stuff that I'm going to have in my online programs, my in-person stuff. I attach it to every, especially any of the long form stuff. And then the group cohort-based program, I just fill in the spreadsheet or populate it into the app. And then I link the videos in there, as opposed to refilming them every single fucking time, which is mind-bogglingly time-consuming. And then I threw it out there as like, hey, coaches, if you guys don't have the resources to do this, you can use my library. Here you go for free. Give me your email address. I will give you my video library. You can use it for your clients, right? So yeah, absolutely it scales, because I mean, how you're going to answer the same questions over and over. How many times have you had a client who's like, hey, should I use creatine? Okay, go write an article about creatine for real. Okay, there's hundreds of them, but people will still read yours. Okay.
So I guess to sum up all of that, if you could, you did a lot of different jobs and then ended up in the fitness industry and that's where you flourished. If you, being where you are now, what if you had to kind of sum up 2 or 3 bits of advice for yourself when you kind of step foot in that gym to save yourself maybe a lot of time, effort, and mistakes, what would those couple of pieces of advices be?
I always fuck around with this question because, as a joke for the butterfly effect, another great movie about this. In pure theory, I would never go back and say anything to myself because I wouldn't want to change the outcome. Now that's a cop out. So, but the real question is what advice would I give to someone who is in the same position as me? And we've already covered some of it. It's like, put your head down, be of service to the person in front of you. Just make sure that, the hour with that person is one of the best hours that they get all week long. You'll find fulfillment in it. Just stay in it, keep showing up, even on the days that maybe you don't have as much energy and don't feel good. I think I don't want to like demonize a generation that's slightly younger, but I know coaches who won't, they're kind of quick if they're not having a good mental health. And I got to be very careful with this, because mental health's a real thing. You have to pay attention to it. So I'm not dismissing its importance. But I think you still have to have some boundaries around not making it easy for yourself to not show up for your clients. Just pour yourself into them. And I think if you find purpose and you put yourself in front of people you enjoy spending time with, it's probably good for you. And guess there's real, genuine, like serious mental health stuff. That's a different story. I'm not talking about that. But like, you know, I've seen coaches who, if the fucking moon is not in the right place and you know, aligned with the planets, like they're not coming in for the clients that day. It's like you lose your career pretty fast with that kind of bullshit. It is just show up consistently without expectation of a specific return. Just try to interact with the world in a positive way. And like I said earlier about the analogy about the poker table, it's like, yes, sometimes showing up for the betterment of most can still actually be conflict or friction with bad faith actors sometimes and getting uncomfortable. I don't think that's most of the time. I think that's uniquely me. It's like if I encounter people who are like behaving like bullies, and I understand most people are conflict averse, I get it, but I kind of go, my reaction is, oh, you like bullying people, huh? Okay, well, pick on me. Like, yeah, how do you feel? Like, come at me. I can handle you. And I don't think seeking conflict is the answer either. I think that's a bad mistake, but I think it's also standing for stuff when you see, you know, stuff. Maybe it's the gym floor. Like, I mean, I toughed out 6 years in the commercial gym, and I got lucky because it was actually a difficult experience in some ways. So it made me very independent and resilient and not rely on the gym because I treat it as an entrepreneurial thing, not as an employee thing. Because some of the coaches I was working with, there were some people who, there was a lot of sexual harassment in that environment. There was predatory multi-level marketing recruitments and genuine conflict with some of these people. So that made me have to go, all right, my livelihood's at stake and my clients' experiences at stake. So I have to be better than this. And I have to make sure I'm so invaluable that this shitbag manager who's hustling this garbage is not able to fire me. But what it ended up doing is it made me really good at the floor walk-up business. It made me really good at the referral-based business. And I was able to feed myself, which is also proof of concept when I needed to leave because the environment got really bad and I was able to thrive on my own.
Sure. And I just to take a little step back that you mentioned with the mental health stuff, I don't know about you, but someone who has and does struggle with that a lot, very few things are better at getting you out of a dark place and putting something good out into the world. Like if you're the best hour in someone's day, that makes you feel better about yourself. So if is it hard? Sure. But very few things are probably more genuinely fulfilling than putting something good out into the universe as opposed to focusing on yourself.
I think the best thing that's ever happened to me was finding the gym, and the devotion to it. It has changed my experience, the way I operate, act, interact in the world. It's given me purpose and fulfillment. It's given me, you know, later in my career, certainly great authority that and opportunities like coming here that are quite fulfilling, and that's good for you. You can't live just based upon that alone. The best part is still, like you said, showing up for the person and seeing, like the story I told earlier about my client and friend who went from a really dark place to, you know, walking into a really great career change. That stuff makes you feel really good about it. And I said earlier, most of the best friends in my life are people who I met. I used to work at this big commercial gym. I made tons of friends off the floor. My best friend in the world who built my website for me, which allowed me to start writing articles, which led to the invitation to T-Nation, was someone I met in a gym setting. I was at a wedding of a good friend of mine a couple of years ago. He started out as a client a decade ago. And sometimes the clients will turn into friends. And I think some coaches also too get really weird about, like some coaches breach boundaries in a really abusive way. But I also think some coaches get a little too uptight about boundaries. You're not a psychotherapist. You're not a doctor. If a client enriches your world and becomes a great friend, and maybe over time that person becomes like part of your social support circle, and they eventually graduate out of being a client, that might be the best thing that could ever happen to you. That's a side quest and a half, but it is. My life is full of amazing people like that. I can't thank or shout them out enough. Even part of getting the career. It was a poker player. I no longer talk to him because there's a bunch of other fucking bullshit with that human being, but it was a poker player who became a good friend of mine many years ago who happened to go to the same gym I did. And I got introduced through him to his trainer. And it was that trainer, who's still a friend of mine to this day, who was the one who kept asking me to come work there. Again, it's surface area of luck, which I started on. The more that you show up in the world, get out into different spaces, meet people, connect with people, deepen those relationships, then that turns into career-based opportunities, but it turns into potential clients. And I think that's an underrated aspect of it, because people demonize luck and say, oh, luck plays in, but you can influence luck by simply putting yourself in more rooms virtually or literally. If I didn't get on that flight to go support Ken Kanakin at Swiss, which I'd been wanting to do for a few years, but I had my own event that had like timing conflicted with it. And I knew Ken from other events that we were at. But I said, no, I'm committing to this. I'm going to go and hang out at this and go support Ken. And who's there? Lee Boyce is a very good friend of mine. He happened to be there. There's a bunch of other great friends. But I got to meet, and I've known you guys through your media and social media for a while. But because, Dave, if you remember, I wrote something for Onnit. And I wrote an article on the Larson Press. Mm-hmm. And it was, I needed quotes, because I was working with Sean Hyson, who was the editor there at the time, and he's a pretty legendary figure in the editorial world. And he wanted quotes from a couple of authorities. And I'm thinking, well, Dave Tate would be great. And there's a couple others that went into it. But who did I know that was connected to you at the time? Allie Gilbert, who's a great friend. Allie and I will be hanging out this weekend. She's one of the speakers at this event I'm going to. And so she helped connect me to you, and you gave me a quote for this article, so it was featured in that article. And then later on I got to meet you and then and Tom, and that turned into the invitation to write for Elite FTS, and turned into an invitation to be on this podcast. And I don't get the invitation to write for Elite FTS if I hadn't put in the work and written for all these other things and developed the skills over the years. And again, that was leaning into it. And again, was it lucky? There's a lot of luck involved, but it was also showing up and creating that luck.
Yeah.
Great point. Thank you.
How can people, we'll wrap this up, how can people get a hold of it?
All roads go through Instagram, for all the pros and cons we talk about social media. It's still great for this, at Andrew Coates Fitness. I'm not one of those people that got to use just my name. I had to stick fitness onto it.
You waited too long.
Way too long. I was a late adopter. And if you message me there, I would honestly, I want you guys to tag this up on your social media, tag Elite FTS, tag Tom, tag Dave, and share this episode if you enjoyed it. Share it with a friend. Get this in a DM to some coach or enthusiast who you think, the person you thought of when you were listening to this. Go, okay, cool, I got to share this with this person. This is how you help Elite FTS grows, how your guys' message gets out. It helps me. But if you have questions, message me. I will answer on, if you want resources on writing or any of the things we talked about or the articles we talked about, I will send it to you. You're going to get a voice message. I'll prove it to you guys. So yeah, go through Instagram. I have been working very hard on my podcast, which is called the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. It's a play on words of the fourth Die Hard movie. And I couldn't give that title up. But for 7 years, I've had conversations with coaches about career development. But I realized there was an incongruence between the audience that ultimately I want to serve most and the conversation of this podcast. So I semi-recently pivoted towards more general audiences. And I want to have both you guys on at some point and share great people with a broader network of that Gen Pop and enthusiasts that we know needs the help. And so you can go listen to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. And then my website, Andrew Coates Fitness. I've got a number of articles on that. I need to write more, but I've also linked resources like the ones that we've been talking about are all linked on my website as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming out.
Oh, thank you guys.
We're done.
Thank you.
Incredible.
All content you see on this channel and at elitefts.com is created by, take a guess, Elite FTS. If you want to help support the content, head over to elitefts.com and pick up literally anything that you need to be able to get more jacked and strong.